Hello and welcome to From Rewatch with Love, a James Bond cinematic rewatch podcast. My name is Graham. Joining me, as always, is Matt. Hello, how's it going?
Hello.
Sometimes I do last names, and this time I didn't. There's no consistency in that. That's fine. This week, we are looking at 2012's Skyfall.
And we will stand tall when it crumbles.
Face it all together.
Yeah.
at Skyfall.
Yeah.
It's interesting because beyond just being kind of a cool sounding name that I just immediately accepted as the name of a Bond film, it featured a lot in the trailers when Bond is being examined. He's having his psych evaluation and he gets asked about Skyfall and then gets really huffy about it and leaves the room. And so there was this question before anyone saw the movie of like, whoa, what is this? What's Skyfall? And then the opening title song, talks about being at Skyfall. I was like, what the heck is going on here? And then you eventually find out what that is. But it was an interesting hook at the time. I will say that.
Yeah. I love the fact that the trailers made it out to be the big central mystery of the movie. And it's just like, no, it's a place they go.
Fooled you. It's house.
Yeah. I remember the trailers being like, oh, he's so pissed off about this Skyfall thing. It must be a really big deal.
I mean, it was a big deal to him at the time. Made, as I say, in 2012 for a budget of an estimated $150 to $200 million. So I estimated 175, which works out to about $200 million after the inflation adjustment.
Yeah.
It's actually, I was surprised to read that it was 8 years ago, but of course, we would have had another Bond film by now already, and there was another one in between. So it actually doesn't seem that unreasonable that it was 8 years ago. But it made, after the inflation adjustment, $1.2 billion.
Uh-huh.
This movie did very, very well.
Yeah, this was a big, major blockbuster that was marketed well, drew lots of people out to the box office.
Yeah, and it was very well received both critically and by audiences. Directed by Sam Mendes, who prior to this had directed American Beauty, Road to Perdition, Jarhead, Revolutionary Road, and since then has directed the follow-up Bond film Spectre, and most recently the also acclaimed 1917. We'll talk about Spectre next week when we get to Spectre. But there's a fun anecdote that he shares in some of the special features where, because he's from England, from London, and knew Daniel Craig prior to this, and says that when Craig was being offered the role of Bond, actually talked to Sam Mendes and was like, do you think I should take this? And Mendes was like, no, don't. It'll follow you forever. That's, if you're going to be James Bond, that's your whole career from here on out. And then 12 years later or whatever, Daniel Craig was like, hey, Sam, do you want to direct a Bond film? And he was like, absolutely, I do.
I also appreciate just about Daniel Craig that he's managed to not have it hang over him in quite the same way that a lot of the other Bond actors did.
Yeah, I think it's because he has made a point of acting in a lot of other different things during his time as Bond. Like very quickly after the first couple, he was in like Cowboys and Aliens and what was it? Logan Lucky.
Yep. In a really very different part.
And more recently was in Knives Out. And yeah, you don't have the same sort of thing. Like when you had Pierce Brosnan in The Matador, it was sort of like, oh yeah, he's playing like kind of a older retired Bond kind of character. Or at least that was the impression that you sort of got. And that was, I think, largely intentional, if I'm being honest.
And like during his tenure, the other like major movie that I can think of Pierce Brosnan having done was the Thomas Crown Affair, which also feels like it's more of a like heist, but it also feels very sort of espionage and in the same kind of genre wheelhouse as a James Bond movie. And then there was that Dante's Peak. We do not speak of Dante's Peak.
I forgot about Dante's Peak. Thank you. Yes.
But yeah, like I definitely think of Pierce Brosnan as iconically James Bond for his era more than I do of Daniel Craig, despite the fact that Daniel Craig is literally actually still the James Bond of this era.
Yeah. Written once again by Neil Purvis and Robert Wade as a team, and then another draft by a different writing partner this time.
You mean they didn't bring Daniel Craig back to workshop the script?
No, I mean, instead of Paul Haggis, who co-wrote, Casino and Quantum. This time it's John Logan, who prior to this had worked on Gladiator, The Time Machine, The Last Samurai, The Aviator, Star Trek Nemesis, which maybe we won't talk about quite so much. Since this, has worked on Alien Covenant and a whole bunch of Penny Dreadful. Like he's written a lot of episodes of Penny Dreadful.
Right.
And the other sort of main crew member that I want to call out, because we mentioned it at the end of last episode, is Roger Deakins as cinematographer. I think I've sort of teased a little bit. Roger Deakins is just such a good cinematographer. Every movie he shoots, just it's got style and it looks great. To give you an idea, I wanted to check sort of how he's been acclaimed sort of awards-wise. So I went to the Wikipedia entry for Roger Deakins' CBE, and it's one of those things where you scroll down to the awards section, and then there's a link to the main article for list of awards and nominations received by Roger Deakins.
Yep.
He's been nominated for 15 Academy Awards.
Yeah.
For cinematography. He's won 2 of them. Just to give you a rundown, this is just the movies he's been nominated for an Oscar for cinematography in.
Right.
The Shawshank Redemption, Fargo, Kundun, Oh Brother, Where Art Thou, The Man Who Wasn't There, No Country for Old Men, The Assassination of Jesse James by the Coward Robert Ford. Those 2 recent ones, by the way, were nominated in the same year. So they were like, no, you're so good. We're nominating you for both of these this year. Yeah. The Reader, True Grit, Skyfall, Prisoners, Unbroken, Sicario, and then the 2 most recent ones that he won for are Blade Runner 2049 and 1917.
Yeah.
He also shot The Big Lebowski.
Really?
Yeah.
Huh. Neat. It's also a good movie.
Yeah, it is. It's funny watching the behind the scenes features for this movie because apart from being a cinematographer, Roger Deakins also prefers to run his own #1 camera. So he's in a lot of the behind the scenes shots. He's really obvious too because he's got just white hair.
Right.
And so it's like just this like mop of white hair behind a camera somewhere in all the different shots of behind the scenes on Skyfall. To save everyone at home effusive gushing from me over the next however many hours this podcast takes us, just take it as read that this movie looks great.
It really does. And I'm sure we'll gush effusively anyhow.
Yeah, but it's shot so beautifully and so cleanly. Even just otherwise boring shots, just like the normal shots, like obviously there's shots that like look cool and it's like very every frame of painting kind of moments, but just the workman-like shots are just so clean and precise and just lots of great movement and framing, and it looks so good.
Yeah. The use of color in this film is like nothing else in the Bond franchise to date. It's so pretty.
Before we even get into recapping the movie, I do like this movie. I think it is very good, and I understand why it was so critically acclaimed and an audience favorite at the time that it came out. Rewatching it again now, as we've been doing these deep dives on all of these movies, it's kind of funny because I have a similar criticism to it that I have to, for example, License to Kill, which was another movie that I really like, but didn't necessarily feel like a Bond movie in a lot of places. Because I actually think the last act of Skyfall is very good and entertaining. I know that there are criticisms that we can talk about, and we'll get to it. Yeah. But it's so very different from
it really is
the formula of a Bond film, which is interesting because there is so much more of the Bond film trappings. Sam Mendes, who I mentioned earlier, the director, is a fan of the Bond films. When he said that Daniel Craig shouldn't take it, that's not because he didn't think it'd be awesome. He's a big fan, and bringing back the characters of Q and Moneypenny is something that he was really, really in favor of. Right. And it doesn't shy away from the lineage in the way that the past 2 movies have. I mean, this was it's Bond's 50th anniversary, right? Like this was a big deal. The movie ends with a title card of like Bond 50, right? And so there's lots of credit paid to that history, not in the way that it was in Die Another Day when it was sort of like, look at all these props. Yeah. Let's get in all these references. You know, they actually use the James Bond theme song through the movie. The very, very first shot of the movie is Bond stepping into frame with just the "Mana."
Yeah.
You don't hear more of the theme at that moment, but just the first little orchestra hit is enough to be like, oh, okay, so you're not gonna do what the last two movies have done, which is be like, no, he's not actually James Bond. And then at the end of the movie, be like, aha, it's James Bond. But there is actually a lot of that at the end of this movie. Which is so odd. But so it's weird that it has all of that and still doesn't necessarily feel, in a lot of places, like a James Bond film.
Yeah.
Now, in a contemporary interview, Daniel Craig actually talks about that.
Oh, okay.
I vaguely recalled this and went to track down the quote, and he talks about the Austin Powers movies.
Oh, I know this quote.
Yeah. He said, this is the quote from Daniel Craig. We had to destroy the myth because the Austin Powers movies effed us. I'm a huge Mike Myers fan, don't get me wrong, but he kind of effed us, made it impossible to do the gags. And I can understand that. It maybe sounds silly now to talk about how big the Austin Powers movies were when they came out, but they were.
They were.
Certainly the first one, and then like less so the second one, but then more again the third one. They were all, regardless of what you think of them, they were very, very popular and pervasive, and they were very capable parodies of the Bond formula.
Oh yeah.
And so I completely understand why Craig, as someone in the comments got on me about my pronunciation of
just Craig.
Daniel Craig. I can understand why he would have that sort of read on it, where it's like, look, we can't do, we can like make a couple references like that bit in Casino Royale where he's like, oh yes, your cover name is Stephanie Broadchest. But, we can't do megalomaniacal villain with a nuclear bomb holding the world hostage because it would be self-parody at that point. Not that the Bond films haven't essentially been self-parody on a couple of occasions, but I understand that these are the Bond movies for their era, right? This is the franchise adapting. And so, I don't know. I'm sort of two minds about it, right? Because there's a lot more divisiveness around the Daniel Craig era than I had initially considered. And I think a lot of that is just that, generally speaking, I've enjoyed them. Certainly Casino Royale and Skyfall, I've enjoyed, and all my friends have enjoyed. And so, obviously, everybody likes them. But that is not the case, he said, reading the comments on Casino Royale.
Yeah, it's wild. I completely understand from the filmmaking side the desire to shy away from the camp. Mike Myers and Austin Powers ruined camp for these films. I don't think Daniel Craig's assessment of the situation is at all incorrect. In order to enter where they did in, 2005, 2006... with Casino Royale. We had a lot of comments on the Casino Royale episode being like, this is the James Bourne era. And I differ with that quite a bit because I don't think Casino Royale is really stylistically similar to a Bourne movie.
It really is not, no.
And I don't think this is really similar to a Bourne movie whatsoever. I don't think Spectre is stylistically similar to a Bourne movie whatsoever. But I think our friend Woody actually responded to me on Twitter saying, but they are a reaction to it. And they are. I think Casino Royale absolutely is a reaction to the Bourne movies and to Austin Powers and to just the current geopolitical state in the world in the early 2000s. I completely understand why they felt they had to recenter themselves in that way.
Yeah.
And even now, I've been thinking about this as we come to the end of the Bond movies. It's like, where do they go next? When Daniel Craig is finally done, where are they going to go next?
Yeah.
They've just had the same thing happen again, because not blowing up in the same way, but we now have Kingsman as a franchise, which is a much, much, much more cutting, especially the first one. The second one is not so much. The second one is moving in the direction of Austin Powers. But the first Kingsman movie is like a really almost mean-spirited satire of Bond movies in the way that Austin Powers was a really, really strong, loving send-up of Bond movies. But the Kingsman movies with the second one are now moving in the direction of this is the prototype for what a camp Bond movie looks like now. But they're making a third one and a prequel. And so when it comes time for James Bond to, refresh the franchise again, well, what do they do?
Yeah.
Do they go young? Because then they're arcing towards Kingsman. Do they do a period piece? Do they go back to the 60s and do it as like a period Cold War spy movie again? They can't go old because they've just gone through this whole Daniel Craig era of what does an aging Bond that no longer fits in a post-Cold War era society do? And what does that look like? Do we still need Bond anymore? They're on the same hook going into the next reinvention of the franchise. And I'm really curious to see where they end up. I don't envy them having to navigate that. And it may be that they decide to just ignore it, right? It's like, we're going to bring some more humor back into it, but we're going to stay Bond. We're going to do what we've always done. And we'll just go from there. Like, I don't know. They've got a lot of like opportunities and a lot of landmines that they need to avoid at the moment.
Yeah. I don't envy them. I mean, there's a certain amount of like when you're the 800-pound gorilla, you sit wherever you want, and Bond can just basically say, "This is what we are doing," and everyone else will be like, "Yep, yeah, you can't stop you." But also, yeah, you're right. There is a lot of tricky ground to avoid there.
And we will get to it next episode. I don't want to like cut into talk about Spectre, but they will step on one such landmine in the next movie. And that'll be a fun thing to talk about when we get there.
I do want to mention, being as you just in that last minute or two used both the terms refresh and reinvention, and thank you, because are we like misspeaking? Because I just want to be really clear. What we said in the Casino Royale episode is that the term reboot is not a useful one to use when discussing James Bond. Not that Casino Royale does not have elements that one could look at in that light. And furthermore, Skyfall, this is fan theories in tatters, Skyfall. This movie not only canonizes that, no, this human being's name is James Bond. It is not an MI6 code name. But also, he has the car from Goldfinger. Somehow. This is why you can't use normal terms of continuity when looking at James Bond movies. Have fun with it. Don't get mad at us.
I love that he has the car. I love the car.
I think it's great.
I love that he gets to use it. I love the gag that they play with it. Like, I love the car. It exacerbates one of my frustrations with this movie, but I love that he has the car. It's one of my favorite bits.
Yeah.
Why don't we talk about the movie instead of like 6 dozen other movies?
Sure. The movie does not begin with the gun barrel sequence once again, but it does begin with, to my mind, kind of a visual reference to it a little bit.
Oh, it's definitely.
Yeah.
100%.
I just wish he entered from the other side of the hallway. But anyway, it's this long shot of a hallway out of focus, and there's the only point of light is light coming in from a window at the end of the hallway. Bond steps into it in silhouette.
Yeah.
And then comes towards the camera completely in silhouette in darkness, and then comes into focus just as he reaches a secondary light source that illuminates part of his face. What a cool shot.
Yeah.
Just Roger Deakins, you madman. Anyway, Bond is on assignment. He hears something. He has his gun drawn. He approaches this room. There's a couple agents dead. There's another one in very bad shape. He's on a live radio call with M, and a hard drive has been taken. It's been ripped out of a laptop and taken. He's trying to stabilize the agent who's dying, but M essentially orders him, no, leave that guy. We'll send a response team. You need to make sure that hard drive doesn't escape. Bond notes that it will be too late for this man if he doesn't stabilize him, but he does indeed leave him. We later find out this man does in fact die.
I like that we get that little bit of character from Bond here, because it almost feels like character growth to me from the previous 2 movies, where he's now actually concerned about keeping people alive. Like, this guy's on his team, obviously. Yeah. Whereas in previous movies, it was all about James Bond and his drive to get the mission done. Him doing whatever it takes to complete the mission, damn everything else kind of situation. We now have this moment where he's like, no, I got to stabilize him. And M is like, no, you have to leave. right now. He like clearly doesn't like it, but follows the order and gets going, but is actively interested in saving somebody as opposed to just sort of like considering them to be disposable along the way, which
Mhm.
I don't know, it's like it's a little nudge along that arc that Bond has been on through the last two films.
No, I like that. He leaves in pursuit, heads downstairs. A vehicle pulls up beside him. There's a woman driving. He gets inside. This is the character who we will only know as Eve until basically the end of the movie. So this is Eve, played by Naomi Harris, who prior to this was in 28 Days Later and a couple of the Pirates of the Caribbean movies.
Oh, wow. Okay.
As the lady that gives Captain Jack Sparrow his jar of sand.
Right.
Or jar of dirt, pardon me.
Yeah. All right.
If you don't want it, give it back. She will return in Spectre and No Time to Die. And since doing this, she was also in Moonlight.
Now I have to go rewatch Moonlight because I did see Moonlight and it was very good and I didn't recognize her in it.
So minor quibble. Eve knows where the thieves are, which is in this black Audi that she's tracking. So I don't know why Bond had to leave Ronson to die when it's like there's other agents and they know exactly where the people are. But Bond is very good. These are not double O's. Bond is the only double O here.
Yeah.
What follows is a pretty spectacular chase through Istanbul. That's where they are, by the way. They're in Istanbul. We have some cuts back to London, where Am and Tanner are at MI6 also on this call. And they're in pretty constant communication through this whole thing. So really a fun chase scene. It's nice to start with a really big bombastic chase scene where I can understand what's happening and follow the action.
Right?
They did this amazing rig where they wanted to allow the actors to appear in shot as much as possible while driving these vehicles. But of course, that's incredibly dangerous because they're not trained stunt drivers. And so they built this terrific thing where there's like a little roll cage that sits on top of the car with a stunt driver in it and this like remote driving setup that's rigged into the vehicle so that Naomi Harris and Daniel Craig can sit in the car and not have to drive it, but not have the car have to be like up on a trailer or anything. Like the car is just driving freely, but it's being driven by the man sitting in the little cage on the roof. Which is why there's a bunch of shots that are just, if you know that this is the case, that are like just cropped the frame at the roof of the vehicle.
Right.
For any like wide shots where you can see the roof and see there's nothing on the roof, those are probably stunt drivers. But the point is there's a lot more shots of the folks doing that. Also, that means that they can strap a whole bunch of cameras to the outside of the vehicle and then just drive it around. It's a lot more nimble than strapping a bunch of cameras to the outside of the vehicle, then putting the vehicle on a trailer and then towing the vehicle through the streets. They can put the cameras on the vehicle and just drive it. It's a lot more nimble when you're dealing with smaller streets.
Right.
They cause the fleeing car to crash, and out of that car steps Patrice. We'll find out later his name is Patrice. He's an assassin. He never speaks in this movie, and he pulls out a gun.
The only language he knows is bullets.
Yeah, no kidding. It's an automatic pistol with this like double drum setup on it, and he's just laying bullets into Bond. We'll find out later that these are special bullets. I don't know why they're special bullets. He's going through so many of them. What a pain in the ass.
It seems like unnecessarily expensive at the very least.
Yeah. Some police who are chasing them spill about the place, and Patrice steals one of their motorcycles, and Bond steals a random motorcycle from somebody in the market. And then the chase transitions from a car chase, although Eve is still driving her vehicle around, to a motorcycle chase that eventually ends up on the rooftops of the Grand Bazaar in Istanbul. Again, some very cool stunts, like all this location stuff of actual stunt drivers driving along the rooftops of the Grand Bazaar in Istanbul. Looks really cool.
Yep.
Then they go through a window and drive through the Grand Bazaar. They eventually end up getting onto a train. Well, so
yeah, don't undersell this.
Patrice jumps off a bridge and lands on a train. So then Bond just drives his motorcycle at the side of the bridge, using it in a way that catapults him onto the train. I guess because he'd miss it otherwise. It's because he ends up landing on the last car. So I guess he needed the extra momentum. But we have Eve calling into M being like, well, he's on a train. And she's like, what do you mean? And she's like, sorry, he's physically on top of a train. I love the rest of this little part of the sequence too, because there's a flat car that has some construction equipment on it. So Bond is hiding behind, like various Caterpillar or bulldozer machinery and runs out of bullets. So he eventually climbs into the cab of a backhoe and Patrice just sprays him with bullets. He does end up hitting him.
He turns the backhoe around to face Patrice, and as he's turning, he gets shot in the shoulder because Patrice has a gun full of bullets and Bond has a glass window between him and those bullets.
Yeah. Driving up beside the train, we get Eve, who is able to see that Patrice has shot the couplings. I don't think this would actually work, but whatever. Shot the couplings between cars, which will then leave the flatbed car that James is on behind. So he uses the backhoe to grab the back of the passenger car that Patrice is standing on. Patrice runs further up away in the train, and then Bond runs up the arm of the backhoe, leaping from it down into the passenger car just as the whole back of the car rips away and the flatbed car falls behind and gets left behind on the track. Which means we get a great 1-2 punch of Bond jumping off, landing in the train, then standing up and adjusting his cuffs, and then M asking him what the hell is going on, and him replying very calmly, just changing carriages.
It's real good.
It's great.
I love the visual of the passenger car just opening up like a tin can. This is another thing that was featured heavily in the trailer. Also, that drop into the train was featured heavily in the trailer. But this is around about the time where trailers started getting really heavy with the like misdirection. Because, I mean, we've already talked about the misdirection of like Skyfall being a big important code word. They digitally painted out the blood and the gunshot.
Oh, smart.
In the trailer. There's no indication that he's been shot. It looks like just a typical Bond action scene where he like does the big action thing and then stands up and like fixes his suit.
I like that. For those who haven't taken trains, sometimes you need to change train cars or carriages, as you would call them in England, if you are going to a destination that the trains will often be like uncoupled and turned into two smaller trains to go to two different destinations. So if you got onto one train, you have... Don't worry about it.
That makes perfect sense, and I had never considered that until now.
Oh, yeah, well, yeah.
I have never taken like a passenger train over long distance, so it had never occurred to me that they would do that, but that is obviously something they would do. That makes a ton of sense.
When Beej and I took the overnight train from Chicago to Boston between C2E2 and PAX East, they told us, you want to have your dinner before 5 p.m. because at 5 p.m. we stop in Albany, I think it was, and the train splits into two and half of it goes to Boston and half of it goes to New York, and the cafe car is on the half going to New York. So that was kind of funny.
Yeah.
On top of the train, Patrice finds a length of chain. I don't know how this length of chain is up there. It seems kind of ridiculous, but whatever. And starts flinging it around. There is so many shots of this with actual Daniel Craig and the actor who plays Patrice by the name of Ola Rapace. I realize I didn't mention. He's been in a whole bunch of non-English movies and TV, and Valerian and the City of a Thousand Planets, which may as well have not been English. But yeah, there's a lot of shots of them. They were both apparently very keen to be like, no, put us in. Let's do this. And so they have like safety equipment and stuff that's been painted out, but there's a lot of them actually on the roofs. Love a good train top chase. Patrice has the hard drive on a necklace around his neck with like braided cabling, so it's not going to come off. Bond can't just like pull it off of him, so that's what they're fighting over. They're struggling to get that off. Meanwhile, Eve, who's been chasing along beside them, gets to basically the end of the road and is like, well, they're going to come out of a tunnel and go across this bridge and go into another tunnel. This will be my last shot to keep up with them. So I guess I'm going to set up to take a shot and try to shoot this guy. And they come out of the tunnel and they're still actively engaged in hand-to-hand combat. And she's like, I have a shot, but it's not a clean shot. So I don't know what you want me to do here. And M waits for a while and waits. Bond is still on the radio at this point. He's not talking, but he's able to hear what's going on. Mm-hmm. Eventually M says, okay, take the shot. And she's like, I'm going to repeat that. I could hit Bond. This is not a clean shot. And she says, take the shot. And Eve does take the shot, and Bond goes flying off the train, off the bridge, and crashing into the water below.
Over a waterfall, for good measure.
Yeah, it falls off a waterfall. And then we just hear Eve over the radio back at MI6 say, agent down, and M looks out the window as we hear the sound of the rain, because it's raining in London. Because, of course, it's raining in London. We hear the sound of the rain get louder and louder as it turns into the sound of the waterfall that we see Bond's body go over. And that's the end of the pre-title sequence.
Mm-hmm.
We haven't had a good Bond is actually dead in a while, have we?
Yeah, it has been some time, hasn't it? When was the last time we killed Bond in the pre-title sequence of a Bond movie? It happened in You Only Live Twice. Did it ever happen to Moore? Did Moore ever die in the opening?
I don't think so. I'm looking through them right now. Yeah, I don't think it's happened since You Only Live Twice.
Well, then it's about time.
Yeah, good stuff.
Yeah.
That is a transition point to move into the opening titles, as it becomes apparent that we are no longer looking at sort of reality and we're looking at a stylized interpretation as we see hands come up out of the water and drag Bond's body down into this like swirling vortex of sand as the opening credits appear on screen and the music kicks in. The music, the song Skyfall by Adele, went over very well. Got a lot of radio play, actually.
Mm-hmm. It's a good song.
It is. It is. They said for the 50th anniversary, they wanted to get another real belter.
I would agree that this qualifies as a belter, yes.
I would say so.
On the Matt Wiggins, I forgot the word, taxonomy of Bond themes.
Yeah, they were aiming for a sort of, a classic Bond theme, right? Just get a woman with an enormous voice to belt out grand theme song. And they were like, who would be good at this? Oh, I know, Adele. And they showed her the script and just sort of let her go with it. And yeah, I'd say it works very well. And it lyrically makes more sense than some of the earlier belters.
Absolutely.
The visual style, we've got Kleinman back here doing the opening titles, and really good stuff.
Yeah.
If you have watched Skyfall in anticipation of listening to this episode, I recommend you go back and watch the opening title sequence again with the movie fresh in your head, because the visuals of this pull a lot from the movie in ways that I think are really cool. My favorite detail is there's a bit that looks almost like the circulatory system kind of pulsing, and it's the train map of London that becomes very relevant at one point.
Yeah.
But there's a lot of moments in this which are that are explicitly first person from Bond, that you're like looking through his eyes.
Yeah.
There's a lot of dealing with his bullet wound and him literally shooting at his own shadows. And then we see the shadow of who will be revealed later as the villain, and lots of gravestones and these statues of stags.
I think my favorite visual in the whole thing, the one that strikes me the most, is like just after the stags, the smoke forming a skull, but the teeth are all the tombstones.
Mm-hmm.
That visual is really, really good.
There's a moment where we see just sort of flaming embers as if floating up off of a fire. And then as we get closer, we see that every one of the embers is a shooting target silhouette of Bond. And later in the movie, when he's doing his physical evaluation, spoilers, he's not actually dead. He will do very poorly on his shooting evaluation against one of these paper targets. But this is a paper target of him, and they're all on fire. And
the dragons, the dancing dragons, like the opening titles almost trace the entire narrative of the film in order from beginning to end. Like it follows the narrative of the film pretty closely. It's awesome. It's really good. The visuals are awesome.
Yeah. I like that there's a shot of a gravestone that says Bond, which is true, but a misdirect. It's like the cover of an old Superman comic book where it's like, why has Superman become evil? And it turns out that there's like 3 frames in there where he was pretending to be evil for some reason, you know? So it's like, it's true, but it's clickbait, really, is what it is. Right? It's like a gravestone that says Bond. It's like, yeah, that exists in the movie. That's a real thing. It's not what you thought it was, but that is a thing that's real.
Yeah.
So yeah, real banger of opening titles here. Just visually, the song, it all really lands, I think.
I can say this openly now because we're at the movie where I think we hit the line. Anybody who's followed me on Twitter for any length of time and has ever seen me tweet Bond opinion should know that I think the first half, at least, of the Daniel Craig era, those first 3 films, are among the 3 best opening title sequences in the entire franchise to date. I think they all rule. Got a really strong streak.
Yeah. I agree with that. After the titles, no funky transitions out of the title this time. We just go back to MI6 where M is writing Bond's obituary, and there's a close-up shot of a little like Winston Churchill bulldog wrapped in the Union Jack sitting on her desk, which the way that she and Bond talk about it, it would have been nice if this had appeared in previous movies.
Yeah, it would. It's one of those things that didn't have to. Like, it mechanically functions well enough for its purpose in this movie that it sells what it's doing, but you're 100% right that it would have been way more effective if it had been there since at least Casino Royale.
Yeah. Cisco's baseball, this ain't.
Yeah.
M then has to go and talk to a member of the government, and she's really not happy to be having to go and talk to whomever this is, because, you know, they failed. Like, not only did they lose an agent, but they also lost this list, whatever this list is. We don't actually know what it is yet. We find out, I think, in this scene. So she has a meeting with the chairman of the Intelligence and Security Committee of Parliament, Gareth Mallory, played by Ralph Fiennes, who you might know as Voldemort.
Among other things.
Among other things. It's funny because he's actually also in the Kingsman, or rather the Kingsman. He's in the upcoming Kingsman movie. Voldemort, Grand Budapest Hotel. I loved him in Bruges.
Oh, yes. You're an inanimate effing object.
I forgot about that line. That's such a good line.
I'm sorry I called you an inanimate object.
He also has the misfortune to have played John Steed in the 1998 movie of The Avengers.
Yet another link to The Avengers.
We cannot escape it. But yeah, Ralph Fiennes, you've seen him. He's great. He will be around for more than just this movie. But in this instance, he is basically telling M, so she says, am I being fired? And he's like, no, we're not talking about firing you. We're talking about the transition towards your voluntary retirement in 2 months. Which M takes with about as much grace as you would expect from Judi Dench's M, who, by the way, is basically, you know, for all sort of plot purposes, is kind of the Bond girl for this movie.
Yeah, sort of.
That's essentially coming from Sam Mendes as well. That's basically what he said, too.
Yeah. I mean, there are clearly two others in this film.
Yeah, but she's in this movie a lot. They don't have sex, but she's in this movie a lot, and she is the sort of main female co-star.
Yes. They continue to cement the... This movie really drives home the relationship between Daniel Craig's Bond and Judi Dench's M as being functionally a surrogate mother to Bond.
Oh, very much so, yes. At least they stick that landing.
Yeah. Like, they go very hard on that. It's kind of inescapable.
It's funny because prior to Pierce Brosnan, M was practically never in the movies, right? Like, he'd be there at the beginning and then maybe partway through, and then probably a funny scene with Q and General Gogol at the end of the movie or something, right?
Right. Yeah.
At most. Occasionally it was just like at the beginning and then never again, or at the beginning and the end or something.
Yeah.
But since the Brosnan movies, M has been featured more and more as the movies go on. This one probably her most amount of screen time. And I think it's probably because Judi Dench is great.
Yeah.
I get the impression that the writers and directors and the producers were like, what a waste if we don't use Judi Dench more.
Yeah, I mean, like, if you cast Judi Dench.
Yeah, we have Judi Dench. We should use Judi Dench.
Absolutely.
She bites back at Mallory saying, and that's it, I'm just supposed to accept that you're going to kick me out because this particular thing failed. And he's like, well, you know, at least you get to still have your dignity. And she says, the hell with dignity, I'll go out when the job is done. Foreshadowing that M exits this movie, I would say not with a huge amount of dignity, but when the job is done.
Yeah.
I appreciate that from a script writing angle of that particular moment of foreshadowing.
Yeah, no, it's really good.
We will find out that Mallory and his committee are basically being like, look, MI6, it's not the Cold War. We don't need this anymore. We don't need these double O's running around. We don't really need you. And so they're transitioning away from it. And later on, when we see Eve again, she talks about how she is assisting Mallory in the transition. Mm-hmm. And so this is stuffy government, whomever, who doesn't understand what it's like to be in the field and doesn't appreciate the things that live in the shadows, as M words it, because, you know, he doesn't know what that's like and doesn't understand, and is going to be basically pushing her out and wrapping up the 00 section.
Right. And sort of in keeping with the themes of the Daniel Craig Bond movies to this point, the lingering question over this movie is, what is the role of James Bond in this new world, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, is there a place for James Bond in the 21st century kind of a situation? Spoilers, the movie will ultimately come down on the side of yes, because if it didn't, there would not be a film franchise for them to continue. But that is definitely the question they're trying to grapple with here.
Yeah. In the car, on the way back to MI6, Tanner hears that someone has started to decode the hard drive and they have a trace on it. And they trace the person decoding it to MI6 and specifically M's computer. And she's like, okay, you need to shut the network down then. And a message comes up on Tanner's laptop of a young M and a Union Jack wearing the MI6 building as a crown and laughing like an old Python animation. And then the phrase, think on your sins. And she looks absolutely baffled as to what that could possibly mean. And I think in this moment she is.
Yeah.
Later in the movie, she will try to play it a little cooler, but I think in this moment she is truly completely baffled about what this could possibly mean.
Yeah.
They get close to MI6, but the bridge is shut down, and M gets out of the car and says to the police, don't you recognize the car? Because I guess this is just the head of MI6's car. It's, get out of my way.
Well, they have the flashing lights and the whole bit. Like,
yeah,
they have emergency responder lights. They should get through.
But getting out of the car does allow M a great view of the explosion that happens as the entire floor of MI6, where the offices were, where we saw them all working with quite a big staff of people at the beginning of the movie, completely explode.
Yep. So question.
Yeah.
Did they actually blow up the MI6 building this time?
No, that was computer graphics.
Well, it's quite convincing. It is,
yeah.
It's very good.
Then we abruptly cut to James Bond alive having sex.
Like he does.
What I don't quite understand.
Well, you see, when a mommy and a daddy love each other very much.
Oh, okay. So does that mean that James and this woman are going to have a baby? That seems very unlikely, or maybe incredibly likely.
What don't you understand, Graham?
I don't need to know how he's alive. I don't need a James Bond recovers montage. But he has this massive wound that we will find out is caused by the bullet from Patrice, whereas the bullet from Eve doesn't seem to have left any lasting problem.
Okay, good. I also thought of that. Like, wait a second. He was shot twice.
Yeah.
Why does only one? Because it's also in the opening, like in the opening titles, the bullet hole is a big recurring element of the visuals during the song. But there's only one bullet hole that they're focused on, and it's the bullet from Patrice, not the bullet from Eve. You would think that the important bullet would be the one that killed James Bond in terms of the construction of the film, but it's not. It's this other bullet that he basically shrugged off that causes him problems all the way through.
Yeah, not the one that knocked him clear from the train.
Yeah, it's weird.
So he's in a beachfront shack in southwest Turkey, where he has apparently been spending his days getting wasted at the local beach bar and I guess earning money or just entertaining himself by doing drinking stunts. In this case, having a drink while there is a tiny scorpion angrily sitting on the hand that he's holding the glass with up to his face. And I thought he was doing this for money, but after he does it, he seems to indicate that he's buying a round for everyone in the bar, which is packed, by the way.
I don't know. Maybe he did win money and thus is using his money to buy a round for everyone in the bar.
Yeah, I think that's because there's a couple people holding money, so I think they're betting on him.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I love that it's like he wakes up, recovers from these bullet wounds somehow. Like it's scarred over. So I don't know how long this was.
3 months.
Okay.
We will find out shortly that he's been dead for 3 months. Quote unquote dead.
And he just went to this bar and was like, hey, I can do stupid crap for money. Got any scorpions?
I assume the stupid stuff for money predates Bond's arrival, and Bond is just doesn't care if he lives enough.
Yeah.
That he participates, that elected to participate in it and found it lucrative enough that it sustained his lifestyle for this duration.
They obviously know him well because the next morning he's still at the bar and it's just him and the guy cleaning up, and he just sort of indicates with some money. He's like, hey, I'm going to grab myself one. And the guy's like, yeah, go ahead. And he just pulls up a glass and a bottle of something from behind the bar and starts pouring himself a drink. On the TV, because there's a TV here, it's playing CNN, and we get to hear from Wolf Blitzer, of all people, which sounds like the name that you would give a news anchor in a James Bond film, but that's a real human. Anyway, we hear about this terrorist attack on the MI6 building in London, and so Bond realizes, oh no, M.
He smolders intently at the television, and then we cut away.
Yeah. We see M looking over the coffins of 8 people draped with the Union Jack, implying that the funeral has just occurred. She heads home to her apartment, which is a different apartment than we saw before, but that doesn't matter. It seems weird that she just has a random ground level apartment. I would assume there would be greater security, certainly now after a terrorist attack on MI6, but there is apparently none. And she goes into her house to fix herself a drink and finds that Bond is there in her kitchen. How does he keep breaking into her house? Especially now, after there was just a terrorist attack on MI6.
And she's moved.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. He winces a little as she turns on the light. She completely undersells this. She's just like, well, where the hell have you been?
Yeah.
And he says, enjoying death. He's got a bit of facial hair going on and will continue to do so for the next several scenes in the movie.
Yeah. So it actually struck me. Part of it is clearly intentional, and part of it is Daniel Craig was pushing real hard in the gym for a while. But it struck me in this movie in particular, he's quite gaunt, like facially. Like his face feels more like sallow than it did in the last 2 films. And the scraggly, like drunkard, haggard look that he's got going on at the beginning makes it more obvious. But even once he cleans up, he's still, I was actually surprised compared to the last 2 movies how much more gaunt he looks. There's the baby fat is gone from his face, but he's got a 6-pack, so that's nice. But he definitely looks a little older and a little more worn in this movie.
Yeah. The upshot of this scene, they don't actually exchange a lot of words because they both know exactly what the other person is thinking, in that Bond came back because he realized that they were under attack and they needed his help. Also, they sold his apartment and put all of his things in storage because they thought he was dead. Or as she says, it's standard procedure for a single agent with no next of kin. Because it's like, you don't have anyone. So, really like hammering home, you have no family.
I like that they get some digs in at each other here. They're obviously angry at one another. M is angry in the like, you're being a petulant schoolboy kind of way. And Bond is like, you had me killed. But M's opening barrage when he's like 007 reporting for duty, and she responds with, oh, ran out of drink where you were, did they?
I love that line. But yeah, he's upset because he thinks that she didn't have faith in him and told Eve to shoot. I could have done it. I wasn't done. Like, I was still actively fighting the guy and you didn't think I could do it. So you had Eve shoot and she hit me and I died, essentially. Fun random fact, M's house, by the way, like the location, at least the exterior, I assume the interior was a set, but the exterior was the house where John Barry used to live, the composer.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Huh. Neat.
Yeah. With MI6 compromised, the building at Vauxhall Cross that we've mentioned before, they have to go to the backup emergency base. And so Bond and Tanner head underground to a series of tunnels that Churchill built, we are told.
This is where the internet lives. It's a series of tubes.
And Bond is told, welcome to the new MI6. I quite like this exchange with Tanner because he mentions Mallory sort of offhand and Bond is like, who the hell is Mallory? And Tanner's like, oh, yeah. You'll get along with him great. Like Tanner just knows that he's like, this Mallory guy, like you can just tell from Tanner's mannerisms that he doesn't like Mallory and he knows Bond won't like Mallory.
Right.
Stuffy government whomstever.
Yeah. So then we get the process of Bond being reactivated. That is going to involve a variety of different processes. He's going to need a fitness test. He's going to need to be debriefed on the situation. He's going to need to do his marksmanship test. He's going to need to do a psych test. And so we get a series of scenes that are Bond doing fabulously well at all of these things.
Looks like hell.
Yeah, it doesn't look like a lot of fun. So he starts out on a treadmill with a breathing apparatus, because that's a thing they do in fitness tests. Well, Tanner is just standing there in his suit and tie, like talking to him about what's been lost. We learn the deets of what has been lost is that this list is an encrypted list of every undercover NATO agent embedded with terrorist organizations around the world. It's an important list. You don't want that information public or all of your undercover agents die. It being in the hands of the enemy is bad, but it's encrypted. But they are clearly technologically savvy people, so it's only a matter of time before they decrypt the list and start leaking names. Bond moves on to doing pull-ups and is continuing to be debriefed by Tanner while he does pull-ups, and ultimately stops and looks at Tanner, who is like, we can do this later if you want. Bond says, you know what? Let's. And Tanner and the guy who's conducting the fitness test leave the room, and Bond just falls to the ground, leaning against the pull-up bars, obviously in pain. The scene puts forward that he's been doing all this through the pain, and that it's caught up with him. The next thing that we have is his marksmanship test. He lines up with a paper target and takes a shot, misses completely. He puts a hole through the upper quadrant of the paper, well outside the bounds of the person.
He hit the paper.
He did hit the paper, but that's not going to be enough for him to pass. So he realigns into a one-handed standing sideways pose, takes another shot, misses again. Then he gets pissed off, starts walking towards the target, and just unloads his entire magazine into the thing. He hits it lots, but none of the adjudicators of the test seem altogether that impressed with his display. And then we move into the psych evaluation. Bond is in an interrogation-looking room, and he sits down with the psych evaluator. And the psych evaluator asks to do some basic word association with him. Bond doesn't look too thrilled, so the psychologist is like, all right, we're going to do some word association. I'm going to say a word I want you to say, the first thing that pops into your mind. I might say day, and Bond says wasted. They go through a number of associations, most of which are sort of typically Bond answers. His agent, provocateur. Woman, what does he say to woman? Provocatrix?
Yeah.
Heart, target, bird, sky, M. He calls her a bitch.
In the observation room, M is watching with Gareth Mallory, and Mallory sort of gives a side look to M, you're going to just sit there and take that?
One of the words is murder. Bond responds employment. It's all very typical Bond. There's nothing particularly unexpected here. And then the final word is Skyfall, and Bond doesn't respond, and the psychologist says Skyfall again. Bond just says done and gets up and leaves.
When we eventually find out what that is, what an odd thing for this man to bring up.
Yeah. So if it's a psychological evaluation and they're diving into how Bond is doing, diving into things from Bond's past that might be traumatic seems like a pretty normal thing to want to ask about when it comes to your agent that you're thinking about reactivating that was recruited as a child or recruited out of the military after having gone into the military as a child.
I guess, but it's like, hey, those PTSD triggers that we didn't have a problem with before, how are you holding up on those?
It is a bit, yeah. Yeah, you're not wrong.
That said, after he leaves the room, I do like how Mallory turns to M and goes, well, that went well. One of the reasons Bond is having trouble with the physical aspect of the challenges is that he still has shrapnel in him from Patrice's bullet. And so we get this shot of him just digging into himself with a pocket knife.
Yeah.
And then he walks up to Tanner with these pieces of shrapnel in a bag and is like, hey, could you get these analyzed for me? These are for M's eyes only.
Yeah.
And it's like, man, you should have done that ages ago.
Uh-huh. Or, gotten a medical professional to do it.
Yeah.
With, anesthetic and a sterilized surgical implement.
Yeah. We move to Bond waiting for the results of all of these tests, and he meets up with Eve, who says that she has been removed from active field service for now. He says, well, that makes me feel a lot safer. And that she's going to be helping Mallory in the transition. Bond is now sort of up to speed on what that all means. They have some very good banter sort of around the So you almost killed me, right? And like they have some good sort of back and forth about that.
She is a lot less mortified by it than I would be.
I would be appalled with myself. There's no way. It'd be like, okay, go get Bond. The man I almost killed? Yeah, I can't talk to him. I hope I never see him again. What? No, just get him and bring him in here. No. I can't go out there. Stop. Yeah, she's playing it a lot cooler. He makes it very easy. Like he's not, he could really be twisting the knife here a lot more than he is. He's only barely playing with her. So yeah, they have some entertaining back and forth. And she talks about how she's looking forward to getting back out in the field. And he's like, cool, when that happens, warn me, would you? This is a cool set, by the way, the underground MI6 headquarters.
Oh, it's great.
Big vaulted ceilings. I think it's really cool.
Yeah. Bond sits down to find out his test scores from M.
He also finds out that the bulldog survived the explosion.
Yeah. Your entire bloody office burns down, and that thing survives.
Yeah.
Bond sits down to learn his test scores. Mallory comes in. This is where Bond meets Mallory for the first time. M gives Bond the news that he passed his tests by the skin of his teeth and is back on active service.
And Bond basically goes, great, sounds good, thank you, I'll get to work then, and gets up to leave. And Mallory is like, well, nah, hold on. Do you actually feel okay? Because, you know, you have to admit, it's a young man's game.
Mm-hmm.
On the one level, it's like, this is only his third movie. We all saw View to a Kill, right? Like...
Yeah. So this gets into one of my frustrations with this movie. This movie sort of is trying to have its cake and eat it too, in terms of the entire Daniel Craig era. Because Daniel Craig entered the James Bond franchise on an origin story of like, this is how James Bond came to be James Bond. And then we had a sequel, Bond's very next caper as James Bond. And then we have the James Bond comes out of retirement as a decrepit, aged old agent that has lost a step. And is there even a place for James Bond anymore?
Without any of the intervening Bond goes on adventures.
Yeah. The movie sort of alludes to the idea, because like the car, that all of the other Bond adventures sort of happened in between. But that, of course, makes no sense if you try to align it, like if you try to line up the red twine. The skip from here's James Bond as a brand new agent to here's James Bond 1 foot in the grave is really, really jarring.
Yeah, because we talked last episode about how the first two movies are basically just one very long story. And to go from like, all right, now it's James Bond to you are too old.
And now it's James Bond. And then this movie opens with, and that was James Bond. Like, it's just a weird arc for them to take, particularly because of how this movie ends. We'll get to there in another couple hours' time.
M defends Bond and says, as long as I am in charge of this division, I will choose my personnel. Thank you. And Mallory's like, all right, well, fair enough. You know, I sort of asked for that. All right. And then on his way out of the room says, by the way, 007, don't cock it up. M gets to swear a lot in this movie.
M gets to do a big swear.
More than most Bond films. Yeah, she has said the S word before, but she gets to do the full F.
Yeah.
First for the franchise, I believe.
I believe so. And maybe a last. I don't know if the F word shows up in the next movie.
I would predict not, but...
Yeah, I don't think it does.
After Mallory leaves, Tanner has results on the bullet shrapnel, which is depleted uranium or something?
Yeah.
Like they're very special bullets.
Hard to get and extremely expensive, he says. Only used by a few people, and he pulls up 3 mugshots, or 3, like, intelligence photos, and Bond identifies the guy that shot him. The thing that gets me, okay, I'm going to ask a question, which undoubtedly the comments are going to answer for me, but I'm bringing this on myself by asking the question. Depleted uranium rounds. My understanding of depleted uranium rounds is that they are intended to be armor piercing. That is the purpose of depleted uranium rounds.
I thought that was the case also.
Okay. Bond gets into the backhoe in the opening sequence, and Patrice shoots at the backhoe, which has like a metal plate behind the driver. And we see the metal plate deform as multiple bullets hit the metal plate behind Bond's head. He even reacts startled to the bullets hitting the metal plate, but none of them penetrate the plate.
Probably because they are, for some reason, depleted uranium pistol rounds. Like, generally, depleted uranium rounds are fired out of enormous guns.
Yeah, I mean, like, I assume you can get smaller depleted uranium rounds. It's because it looked like it's rule of cool situation, right? Like,
Yeah.
they need something that they can point to that's unique about the bullets, and they wanted to do something that was, like, cool looking, and maybe they don't actually align. I just feel like the bullets probably would have gone through that tiny steel plate behind Bond if they are indeed armor-piercing bullets.
A very cursory Googling tells me that the most common military use is in 30 millimeter ordnance.
As opposed to 9.
Yeah. Or the U.S. Army uses 120 millimeter or 105 millimeter rounds in the M1 Abrams tank.
All right.
Depleted uranium is favored for penetration because it is self-sharpening and flammable.
Cool.
I don't have enough time to read the citation listed here for what self-sharpening means.
Probably the way it deforms causes it to elongate into a point.
I guess that explains why Bond was in so much pain.
Yeah. Anyhow, he points out Patrice on the monitor.
And they say that he's going to be in Shanghai in 2 days' time, probably on a job. Bond is going to meet him there. So Bond heads out to get ready. And Tanner sort of idly says, I didn't actually know he passed. And M says he didn't. So M sent him back out to work when he had not, in fact, passed his evaluations. Mm-hmm. On his way out, M says that the quartermaster will be in touch. He's not set up here, so he'll arrange a meeting somewhere else. And so Bond goes to the art gallery. What painting is he looking at?
To the Internet Movie Painting Database.
I just Googled Skyfall painting and
there are 2.
Well, this particular painting is entitled The Fighting Temeraire Tugged to Her Last Berth to Be Broken Up. It's a 1838 painting by Turner. Bond is looking at that. It's like maybe a little heavy on the symbolism because another man comes over and sits down to him and was like, it's an interesting painting. You know, the old warship being towed off for scrap. Mm-hmm. And Bond is like, I'm just gonna head out. And this guy says, excuse me, 007, I'm the quartermaster. The reason Bond didn't think this guy was the quartermaster is because he's very young.
Bond says you've still got spots.
Yes. So this is Ben Whishaw, who is actually older than both of us.
Yeah, that doesn't surprise me.
He just looks so young. No, I assumed he was in his 20s here.
How old is he?
Presently, he's 40.
All right. That seems about right. I saw a movie just recently with Ben Whishaw in it where he was again playing young. Playing younger than this, in fact. So, I mean, he just looks young.
Hadn't been in a huge amount of stuff prior to this. He was in Layer Cake, though.
Yeah, he was. You're right. He was.
with Daniel Craig.
Yeah.
Yeah. But yeah, this is Q.
He's a very different Q.
He's a very different Q, but they do have a slightly antagonistic dynamic that still has an undercurrent of mutual respect, which I appreciate.
Yes, and he does at the end of the scene still ask Bond to bring his equipment back in one piece.
Yes. The extent of the equipment, I find this really funny. So there's a radio transmitter, very basic. He's like this amazing new thing called radio, and a gun that's been coded to Bond's palm print so only he can fire it, which was very cool when we saw that in License to Kill. It's just funny to me that like literally the only interesting gadget is one that we've done before.
Yeah.
Bond, I don't think, ever actually gets to fire it.
I think you might be right.
Someone else tries to, which doesn't work.
Yeah. He never gets to fire it because it gets dragged off into the cave and he never goes to retrieve it.
Yeah.
Huh.
And Bond sort of quips, is that it? To which Q responds, were you expecting an exploding pen? We don't really go in for that these days.
Which is funny. It's a funny line, but that also really, like, that particular line really feels like they're almost putting too much of a point on it. It is the, like, what were you expecting? Yellow spandex line from X-Men. Which is like a little bit, yeah. I was.
Yeah, I thought it worked better in X-Men, but yeah, it is sort of like, yeah, what were you expecting? This thing that you wanted? Yes, I wanted that. Why would
you draw attention to it?
You know I want that. That's why you're saying this. Why wouldn't you give it to me if you knew that I wanted it? Also, at what point have we ever seen Daniel Craig as James Bond use anything even approaching an exploding pen?
Yeah, we have not. That, again, is just reference to the franchise at large, right? Like, it's just, this is the same Bond as all the other Bonds, so of course he's used an exploding pen in one of his other 22 adventures.
But I thought that this was a totally different James Bond. This is why you can't use the word reboot. We go to Shanghai. Amazing sweeping shots of Shanghai. Bond is chilling in the pool, waiting at the bar.
It's a sweet pool.
It's a good pool. He finds out when Patrice is landing. He sees him at the airport. He tracks him all the way to his destination. Just some amazing shots in here. The highway that's all blue, that's just how that's lit normally.
Oh, awesome.
Yeah, they were just like, that's cool. Let's get a shot of that. He watches Patrice go into this office building and kill the security guard, which seems like a massive liability if you're someone like Patrice, but sure. And Bond's like, oh, okay, got to get inside. So he follows Patrice by hanging from the bottom of an open air elevator, almost falling because, his arms are not actually up to strength.
Yeah.
But eventually getting to a floor very, very high up the building. It's not partially under construction. It's just empty. So there's no walls. So it's just glass everywhere and glass walls and glass doors. And it's all lit externally from all these other buildings that have these massive illuminated billboards on them. And this whole scene just looks so damn cool.
Oh, yeah. This whole sequence is very cyberpunk.
It's very, very cool.
The lighting and the color and the big advertising billboards providing the light for the scene. Just everything in this scene is super cool. It's aesthetic.
It really is, yeah. There's a moment where it looks like Patrice might hear Bond coming, but Bond sort of freezes in place with the door at such an angle that when the room gets illuminated, the reflections of the light obscure him. Shooting this must have been a challenge and a dream at the same time.
Yeah.
In the next building over, there's this illuminated apartment where there's some men and a woman, and we see Patrice use this cool little automatic glass cutter thing to cut like a perfect hole out of the very, very thick windows in front of him so that he can put his gun through it. He builds a gun out of this briefcase that he has together that he was provided at the airport.
Even Patrice gets better gadgets than Bond.
That's a good... He does, honestly, yeah. A man comes in and sits down in the apartment across the way, and they unveil this painting that they're showing him, and Patrice shoots the man in the back of the head.
That's 2 murders Bond has witnessed on the same night.
Yeah, this one he just let happen.
Yeah, he didn't even try to stop it.
Patrice, though, does realize that Bond is there, and immediately after killing his target tries to whip around and kill him, which then leads to this really cool... It's not exactly gun kata, but it's like a hand-to-hand fight where Patrice keeps trying to use his gun.
Mm-hmm.
Eventually ending up with him dangling out the window with Bond holding on, screaming like, tell me who you're working for. But Patrice slips out of his grasp before he can say anything. Not that it was really indicated he was going to say anything, and falls to his death, which makes Bond very upset. Because normally he likes to do the killing. No, he's upset because, that was the end of the trail, right?
Right.
He looks across to the apartment, and the woman in the apartment is staring at him because, of course, there's open windows on either side. She's just staring right at him, and there's this really cool shot where Bond is sitting there, and the billboard goes dark briefly so that there's no light for her to see him with, and then when the light comes back up, he's gone.
It's real good.
He is just elsewhere on the floor looking through Patrice's briefcase, and he finds that there is a casino chip for a casino in Macau. So he still has a lead because that's whoever was going to pay him.
Yeah.
Back in her apartment, someone has hacked into M's laptop again and is playing the weird old graphics of her. She's trying to figure out the source of that image, and it's a picture of her from many years ago in Hong Kong, I believe. And then she gets a link that's like, click here to claim your prize. And it's the first 5 names of agents from the list.
I know I shouldn't ask. Why on earth, if you're M, would you click that link without first calling your IT security people? Because that's just asking to have your laptop blow up.
That's true.
I'm not expecting a YouTube link. I'm expecting the C4 explosive that's been packed into my laptop's battery compartment to go off. Anyhow, it's the first 5 names off the list. So M hops on the phone to Tanner to pass along the information that the first 5 agents are burned and they need to be pulled out because their lives are in danger. The message on the computer advances to say 5 new names will be released every week. And then we see the message again directed at M, think on your sins.
In, we assume, Macau, Bond is about to shave in this opulent hotel room when there's a knock at the door. So he approaches the door with his gun drawn, and it turns out that it is Eve, who is there for some reason to deliver him a message, which is to let him know the list has been decoded. Whoever has it has, everything that you just said, all the stuff with the names. She notes that Bond is about to be shaving himself with what I would call a straight razor, but apparently a cutthroat razor is another word for it. And he hands it to her and is like, well, maybe you could do this. And she's like, oh, you're going to put your life in my hands again, are you? And then there's a little scene with her shaving Bond. And it's it's sexual.
Yes, it's extremely sexy.
It is heavily implied they have sex after this.
Yeah, it's not shown.
It's not shown and it's not explicit, but it is heavily implied. Let's just talk about it now. At the end of the movie, it will be revealed that this is Eve Moneypenny. And indeed, this is the reintroduction of Moneypenny into the franchise. And she will return as Moneypenny in Spectre, and she's slated to return as Moneypenny in No Time to Die. Mm-hmm. We talked about, way back when we were talking about Lois Maxwell, how one of our interpretations of the Bond-Moneypenny relationship is that one possible interpretation is that they had a romp once.
Right.
And then we're like, well, we shouldn't do that because we're in, business office. This is going to be weird, but we will enjoy routinely teasing one another about it.
Right. They're exes with a good relationship.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I infer that is what we're seeing here.
I guess. Yeah. I think there's plausible deniability.
Oh, definitely.
That they could have ejected from they've been so teasing each other back and forth to this point. And Eve is, by nature of how cool she's managed to play everything so far, in a lot of control over this situation. It is also implied in her character that she could very easily have just bounced. And it wouldn't have been a thing. She seems to command enough respect from Bond in their interactions that he would have not all right, fair play, right? So they are leaving a ton of plausible deniability here for you as the viewer to sort of take this in whatever direction you want. And I think that's fine. I think leaving it up to the imagination is totally the right move here. What happens in the scene that we don't see is basically irrelevant to their continued relationship to one another going forward, or even looking backwards. You can fill in this gap however you want.
Yes.
I don't think it's important, right? I don't think the actual sort of what happened in the cut is really important. Mm-hmm. We've seen many different interpretations of Moneypenny's relationship to Bond in the past, and we will, over the next two movies, see it again in future. I think your interpretation is perfectly valid. I agree with you. I think the movie kind of implies it, but I don't think it's a necessary question to answer.
Yeah, that's fair. We go to a shot of Bond approaching this casino, which apparently you enter by raft, by boat across this bay full of lanterns. It looks absolutely amazing. You'd never know this is not a location.
It's a set, hey?
This is a tank at Pinewood.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
I'm going to gush about Bond's tuxedo here.
Oh, please.
This is the one. This is the best Bond has ever looked in a tuxedo. It's midnight blue.
We finally hit peak Bond tuxedo.
Oh, we've hit peak Bond tuxedo. I wish I could pull off a tuxedo this well. I wish I could get a midnight blue tuxedo this exquisitely tailored.
Well, you could too if you hired Tom Ford to do it.
And, hired a personal trainer to run me through the ringer for 3 straight years. and a personal chef. Oh, I love this tux.
I mentioned that because all of Bond's costumes in this movie are done by Tom Ford.
Tom Ford, yeah. The one thing that always perplexed me, I was looking for it very, very closely in the movie when I watched it the other night. For the longest time, I've been trying to figure out if he is wearing a midnight blue jacket with black pants, which would be unorthodox. And I think I've come around, upon watching very closely for it. Part of the thing is that, and one of the reasons I'm sure they went midnight blue is that it is virtually, in almost every scene, it is lit by yellow light. Mm-hmm. And if they had gone black, it would look washed out, whereas having gone midnight blue, it looks black. Mm. But you can tell it's midnight blue because the lapels and the stripes on the pants stand out because those are black, but the rest of the body of the suit is midnight blue. But I've come around to the fact that the pants are midnight blue. The one slightly unorthodox thing is that he has a vent in his jacket, which is less formal. But I want to emulate this costume every time I have reason to wear, or I want to emulate this outfit every time I have reason to wear a tuxedo. But I always end up sort of steering away from it for fear of looking like I'm wearing James Bond cosplay.
I think that fear and the initial wanting to dress like this are both very valid things to feel.
Anyway, it's a good suit, Bront. But if this is a good casino, Bront.
Oh, the casino looks amazing. So yeah, this is the casino in Macau. Eve is also inside in a dress that also looks great on her, and they are communicating by little invisible earpieces. So there's this cool long take of Bond walking inside and walking around the casino with them both communicating, but only sort of like crossing paths at different points. Like they're talking to each other the whole time, but they're only actually near each other very briefly once or twice.
I love that they affect the audio so that it's like when they're close to each other, it's high fidelity audio, and when they're far apart, it's like got an effect happening on it so that it's coming over the earpiece.
There's a good establishing shot where we see that by the entrance there is a pit with Komodo dragons in it because it's that kind of casino. So Bond heads up to where you cashed your chips out and says, I'd like to cash this out, and hands over the chip that was in Patrice's thing. And the woman looks very surprised and is like, I will be right back. And Bond notices that there's a man who receives a call in his earpiece and talks to a woman, and the woman turns around, the woman who saw him through the window, and she is now staring directly at Bond. And then a couple men come up and hand him a briefcase with, Bond estimates, 4 million euro, and also hand him a stack of chips with compliments of the house. So Bond heads over and basically waits to be approached by this woman. So this woman introduces herself as Séverine, played by Berenice Marlowe, who has not a lot of credits to her name. She was in the new season of Twin Peaks as French woman.
All right, then. Well, she's really good in this. In this scene. She's not in this movie for very long, but in this scene, she's really good.
I was going to say much the same thing. She isn't in the movie for very long, but she makes quite an impression.
Yeah.
She is a character who is trying to play everything really cool and smooth, but is also terrified, and to the extent that later on knows that she's going to die. Mm-hmm. Because they sit down and have a conversation over some drinks. He comments, he's like, why do you have 3 bodyguards, by the way? What's up with that? That seems like an awful lot for just for you, especially since I know that you have a gun on you. He mentions that she has a gun like strapped to her thigh.
He names the model of the gun.
She names the model of gun that he has. I don't know how they figured this out.
I assume she knows his gun because she's got him pegged as British intelligence, and it's standard issue.
I guess?
But the fact that he's like, and you've got a Beretta whatever strapped to your inner thigh, it's like, how do you know this?
She says that the men are going to kill him when she leaves. And he's like, shame. Like, we can't just like read all the dialogue, and we shouldn't because they do it way better than we do. But yeah, this is a very well played scene. They have a really good back and forth. And he's like, look, I want to meet your employer. And she's like, well, be careful what you wish for. But she's like, I tell you what, they're going to try to kill you after I leave. I'm on this boat, at this berth, at this dock. We cast off in an hour. So if you live somehow, come on over.
Yeah.
Because she's like, you want to meet him? You think you can kill him? And he's like, someone usually dies, which is... Were I her and was aware that I was in a Bond movie, I would consider that a red flag. But she, of course, is not self-aware that she is a character in a Bond movie, so does not realize that the someone who usually dies in this situation will be her.
Yeah.
But she does eventually excuse herself, and Bond raises his glass to the men who are staring at him, which I think is pretty funny.
Yeah. And then he makes to leave.
Yeah, he just gets up to leave. And then he is stopped on the bridge over the Komodo dragon pit by 3 men. And then we get a fight.
We do.
It's a good fight.
Yeah, it is a good fight. It's not a long fight. It's not an overdone fight, but it's a good fight. Bond manages to like tune one guy up with an uppercut with the briefcase full of money. That looks like it hurts.
Yeah.
There's a fight that happens between Bond and one of the other guys down in the Komodo dragon pit.
There's some comedy moments in this.
There are.
The guy picks Bond up and Bond sees the Komodo dragon, and just the shot of his face being like, oh.
Like, oh, we're not alone down here.
Yeah. And then Bond tries to warn him. Bond's like pointing at it like, behind you, and the guy just attacks him and isn't paying attention.
The guy gets Bond's gun and goes to shoot Bond, not realizing that it's a special high-tech gun. Fails to shoot Bond when the gun won't fire, and is immediately grabbed by the ankle by the Komodo dragon and dragged off into the Komodo dragon cave.
Why do we even have that cave? Bond, like famous action protagonist Mario before him, Bond vaults off the back of the other Komodo dragon.
You didn't go where I thought you were going to go with that.
What?
Like noted action protagonist Roger Moore. vaulting off of lizards.
This is a much more Mario Brothers move, because
It's
he
true.
like bonks off the dragon like Mario leaping off Yoshi. And jumps back up to the bridge where another guy points a gun at him, only to get knocked out by Eve, who helps him back up, tries to hand him the money, and he says, "Put it all on black," and leaves the casino looking very suave. And she's like, that guy standing there with her case of money. And it's like, did the rest of the people in this casino not also work for this bad guy? Is Eve not about to get completely jumped? Like, why is Bond just leaving her there? Sorry, that just struck me as I was watching this. I was like, she's in incredible danger.
One hopes she makes an exit simultaneous to Bond and does not actually place the bet as instructed.
Yeah. We see a boat. We assume it's Severine's boat. She has laid out champagne with 2 glasses. She's very confident, which I appreciate. But then the captain comes in and is like, "We have to cast off." And she's like, "Oh, okay, that's fine." Like smiling. She's like, "That's great."
Yeah.
I'm really happy that you told me that. And then she goes and has a shower, and then somehow Bond appears in her shower, which is bold.
It is bold. This scene generated some controversy when the movie came out.
Yeah.
I don't want to defend it too strongly, but it's pretty clear from context cues that she was hoping he would be there to have sex with her.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, he surprises her in the shower. And yes, it is established that she is a former sex worker in the context of the film. And Bond knows this. And so there are power dynamics at play that make it questionable. It's not great. But I mean, when Bond arrived, the champagne was in the bucket with ice, and she had only been wearing a silk house gown. And there were glasses out, and she had invited him there. Like, I don't know. It's not great. It's a little less straightforward than some of the previous sex scenes have been in Daniel Craig's era.
Mm-hmm.
So your mileage may vary on this scene.
Yeah. We cut to Gareth Mallory's office, where M is joining him, as the BBC is reporting on the released video of an MI6 agent who was on that released list, who was deep undercover, who was captured and assassinated. So Mallory's pretty upset. M's pretty upset too, for what it's worth. Like, they're both angry, not necessarily at one another, but they're taking it out on one another.
Right.
Mallory tries to convince M that this is exactly why MI6 can't function in today's society, to which M is like, no, this is exactly why MI6 needs to function in today's society. This person, whoever this is, comes from the same place as Bond does. The place you say doesn't exist. The shadows. You know, this is someone who's one of us. They know how we operate. They're sort of narrowing it down to, it must be a former agent, but I don't see why or how or who this would be.
Mm-hmm.
The next morning, on the boat, Severine is standing on the deck at the bow as they head toward this island, and Bond heads out to join her. And the crew of the boat are just like, what, huh?
Yeah, who's this guy?
Yeah. And Severine is like, you should probably turn back now. This is your last chance. And he turns around and sees that there's a bunch of dudes. They now all have guns. And he's like, I don't think I have that choice anymore. So they approach this island. Boy, what a cool place. A lot of the shots where scenes happen on the island are sets at Pinewood. But the exterior of the island, it's called Hashima Island. It's also commonly known by another name, which is Gunkanjima, which means like battleship island, because it looks kind of like a battleship. Anyway, it's off the west coast of Kyushu, which is the southernmost of Japan's big 4 islands. And it used to have an undersea coal mine, but in 1974, they ran out of coal, and so everyone left the island. But then it became a tourist attraction in the 2000s because of these largely undisturbed ruins that had stood there for 3 decades.
Right.
Now it's open for tourists. It's also the coal mine is a UNESCO World Heritage Site as of 2015.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah, which was after this movie. So I don't know if this movie helped publicize it at all.
Interesting.
The island has shown up in various other, mostly Japanese media, but it's shown up in other stuff.
At any rate, it is not playing itself. Much like Vancouver, it's not playing itself. It is explained to us that the villain that we are about to meet used computer hacking to make everyone think there was a gas leak on the island, and they all fled to avoid dying from a leak the gas leak from their chemical plant. And so like there's still bikes and stuff strewn all over the place because it's like, well, they just up and left. They skedaddled because they thought their lives were in danger, and now he has full run of the island. It's his. And so he lives and operates here.
Because, as she says, whatever he wants, he takes. This person, whoever he is, he can make things happen and get what he wants.
And they call him Thunderball. They don't actually call him Thunderball.
No.
What they do call him is Mr. Silva.
Yep.
We are introduced to him in the very next scene.
Yes. This is Silva, played by Javier Bardem. Gosh, when did I first see Javier Bardem?
That is a good question. I don't have an internal catalog of all the movies you've ever seen.
Where did you first see him then?
And well, now I'm looking at a catalog of all the movies he's ever been in. Oh, wow. He's playing King Triton in The Little Mermaid.
He was in Collateral,
which I didn't see at the time. I only saw Collateral for the first time quite recently.
It's so good.
It is really good. It might have been No Country for Old Men, but I may not have even seen No Country for Old Men until after I saw Skyfall. It's possible that I had not actually seen him in a film before this.
I know I was aware of him before No Country for Old Men, but I cannot for the life of me find on his IMDb page where I would have seen him.
Yeah, no idea. In the news for his casting in No Country for Old Men.
Regardless.
So Bond is brought into this big server room, basically. It's a big, open, empty room full of racks and computers and an elevator. He's tied to a chair and an elevator descends from the other end of the room. And this is where we get the introduction of Javier Bardem as Mr. Silva. He walks across this long room telling a story about rats.
It's been so long since we got a real good big villain monologue.
Yeah.
In fact, I actually don't know if we've ever had a big villain monologue quite like this, or if we just think that Bond villains monologue like this. But this is a Bond villain monologuing the way that we think they do.
Yeah.
And it's great.
It is. He's a really good villain. The story he walks in telling, he tells it with such panache too. His like storytelling technique is great. Not anything like me. He comes in and he is talking about, do you like the island? My grandmother had an island and we used to go there all the time. But one year we came back and it was infested with rats. You know how you deal with rats? Dig into the ground, you put a barrel in the ground, you bait the barrel. And in the case of the island, it was coconut that they used. And then the rats try to eat the coconut, they fall into the barrel. Then what do? Do you throw the barrel into the sea? No. Just leave it. And the rats will get hungry and they will eat each other. And at the end, you will have 2 rats. And then you take those 2 rats and you release them back onto the island. They no longer eat coconut. Now they eat other rat. And we are like those 2 rats, James. And he segues it into a talk about how he was a former MI6 agent. Bond correctly points out that he was formerly stationed to Hong Kong, Station H. So once again, the movie having its cake and eating it too, he notes that he was stationed in Hong Kong, I think he says from 84 to 97, but he and Bond, their tenures as agents never overlapped. Despite the fact that Bond has the car from Goldfinger from the 1960s. But anyhow, he was stationed to Hong Kong, and he has clearly been wronged by MI6. He has broken off doing his own thing, and he sort of sells James on it. He's like, you could join me. You could have whatever you want. I make my own missions. If I want to disrupt a burgeoning democracy in South America, bang, I can do it. If I want to do this other thing, all I have to do is press a button. Join me, and we could take down MI6 together. And Bond doesn't go in for it. He then informs Bond that M has set him up to fail. He asks Bond, is like, did you pass? Are you fit for service? And Bond is like, yeah, I am. And he's like, are you though? And he goes and sits down at his computer and is like, let's look at your results, shall we? What did you score on your marksmanship test? It's like a 70. No, a 40. Then he reads out his psychological profile to Bond. This guy is unstable, has past trauma, seems to have negative associations with violence and what have you. We do not recommend that the subject is fit for service. And he's like, so M betrayed you. M sent you out here unfit for service, expecting you to die.
Or as he puts it, mother has been very bad. His delivery is so great It's hard to describe, but the way that he talks and the way that he describes all of this and the way that he's dealing with Bond it's like equal parts affable and creepy. It's terrific. So good, especially compared to Dominic Green from last movie, who did not leave an impression. Silva is a terrific villain. There's a moment here, it's not even a moment, there's a bit here I do want to mention where he is talking about Bond's physical results and starts to unbutton Bond's shirt and inspect the scars that he has and is like, oh, look at what she's done to us. The takeaway from why he's talking about M like this is that he feels personally betrayed by M, and at the time felt a very similar maternal kinship to M that Bond does. And so that's why he said, mother has been very bad, right? Like he felt like he's been betrayed by the mother figure that he had in his life, which was M. But he also continues to caress Bond, particularly his collarbone and neck, and is coming on to Bond. And there's an aspect here of playing the homosexuality as deviance again that we mentioned in Diamonds Are Forever with Mr. Wint and Mr. Kidd.
Mm-hmm.
And that is there, inarguably. But I do like that it is heavily undercut in this moment by Silva suggesting, as he touches Bond's thighs, by suggesting that there is, of course, a first time for everything, to which Bond responds, what makes you think this would be my first time?
Mm-hmm.
So I'm not going full, yes, we stan a bisexual Bond, but Bond being completely cool with that notion and totally undercutting Silva's attempts to get him on the back foot in that way, I think help make it not so, ooh, he's doing gay stuff.
Yeah. I mean, like, you're 100% right. I think it's sort of implied that at the very least on Bond's side of the fence is like, well, I will do whatever I need to for Queen and Country.
Mm-hmm.
That's fine. What's to say I haven't before?
Yeah.
In the case of Silva, it's not clear to me that he's doing more than putting on an act. We know that at the very least he has had Severine in his employ. Typically when Bond villains do, there is a sexual relationship involved there. It's not clear to me that this is an instance of anything beyond Silva playing at homosexuality in this case.
No, I actually think he's just bi.
Yeah, I mean, like, so do I, right? Like, I think he's a bisexual man in this case. But the way this scene is played, I'm not sure that they're even really going for the homosexuality as deviance, as that being part of the portrayal.
I just think it's hard to avoid that coming across when there's like no gay characters in Bond ever, and then here's the bad guy and he's caressing Bond to make him uncomfortable.
Fair, yeah, that's fair.
Hard to avoid that reading, but again, I think that Bond being like, that's not a thing for me, I'm fine with that, just kind of undercuts that.
Yeah. Sorry, I had to sort of talk around that to get to like my own thoughts on it.
Mm-hmm.
I agree with you.
All right. Unrelated to that, there is this moment that you mentioned already where he's like, come with me, we can do our own stuff, we can be our own, we can send ourselves on our own missions, and we can do the missions we want to do. And as you say, lists off, destabilize this thing here, steal all this money over here. And it's implied that he has done that, right? We are told that he kicked everybody off this island, and we know that he orchestrated that terrorist attack on MI6.
Mm-hmm.
But that's it. Silva never threatens any kind of big thing. Silva's goal in this movie is to kill M.
Yeah.
So, like, there's never any big, like, scary, world-spanning threat that Bond has to stop by taking Silva down. I don't know if that's necessarily a criticism. I just think it's kind of funny that it's like, presumably he's been doing these things for a while and getting away with it.
Yeah.
The only reason that he doesn't get away with it this time is because Bond is involved and it's taking down M. But it is just kind of funny that it's like, he theoretically has all this power, but the third act of this movie has nothing to do with all of that.
Yeah.
In fact, the third act of the movie explicitly in the plot of the movie takes away that power from him to bring him down to a much more even playing field with Bond.
Mm-hmm.
It's just kind of funny to me that it's like, this is why hours ago now at the beginning of this podcast, I said that it doesn't feel like a Bond film in that way because there is no bigger threat. It's a very small personal threat.
Yeah.
And they have this moment where it's like, look at me and how powerful I am and how I can control the world to my whims, but I'm not going to.
You've caught me between world domination plots.
Yeah, it's just kind of funny. Less funny is the scene where they go outside and Severine is there, having apparently been beaten and tied to a statue from whatever leader there used to be here. In the movie, this is not Japanese, so I'm not sure exactly where this is supposed to be, but he pours each of them a shot of, what is this, Macallan? Some kind of whiskey.
It is Macallan 50, which I Googled.
Oh, yeah.
Because I was curious. If you had to guess, it's no longer available.
Good start.
For obvious reasons. But if you had to guess, how much do you think a bottle of Macallan 50 is listed for on the internet? If you were able to buy one today from a liquor retailer, how much do you think that would be likely to set you back?
Is there any kind of like bond tax on it because it was featured in Skyfall?
Almost certainly.
Okay.
Based on the prices that I'm seeing today, because of course I can't look up how much it was in 2012, or at least not as easily, but based on the prices I'm seeing today, almost certainly Bond had an effect on it. But I vaguely recall an article, so I'll tell you what I think it was around about the time this came out, but we can talk about what it is now. How much do you think a bottle of this would set you back today?
$300.
Whoa, keep going.
Look, I'm very bad at estimating top shelf liquor. Okay, I'll keep going by considering the scoff there. I'll jump up by an order of magnitude. Let's go $900. Your silence tells me I am still too low.
Add 2 zeros to that.
Are you effing joking me?
Also, that's pounds.
So 90,000 pounds.
Yes. WhiskeyShop.com has Macallan 50-year-old listed at present at 89,995 pounds. WineSearcher.com bottles of the 2018 release listed at $158,000 average. There's a bottle in Washington, D.C. for $178,000 Canadian right now.
Wow.
I am given to believe that when this came out, like when this movie came out, it was around $35,000 US a bottle.
That's ridiculous.
Yeah. So that's how much this whiskey costs, apparently.
What if I just wanted to buy like a normal bottle of this stuff?
A normal bottle of Macallan?
Yeah.
Let's have a look. A bottle of Macallan 12, $69.95.
All right. Yeah. All right.
Yeah, a bottle of Macallan 12 at the LCBO in Ontario is $95.
All right. Let's just head over to the LCBO then. Head down there and get some Macallan, bud. Good Christ. Anyway.
Yeah.
Ludicrous. So Silva pours them both a glass, and then he walks over and gets Severine to stand up and balances his glass on her head and says the first one to knock the glass from her head wins. And he'll even let Bond go first, handing Bond a like matchlock pistol.
Yeah.
So Bond takes aim with a gun to his head at the same time. And we know that Bond's aim isn't great, and his gun is shaking slightly. And he fires and misses. Doesn't hit the whiskey, doesn't hit Severine either. He hits some of the statue in the background. And Silva's like, oh, what a shame. And then just shoots Severine, which knocks the glass off. So he goes, oh, look, I win. To which Bond responds, that's a waste of good scotch, and then attacks everybody there. Quite successfully.
Yeah. That line is pretty cold from Bond in context.
Yeah, I thought so too. I thought it's like, haha, funny line. But in the moment, I was like, ugh, come on, man.
Yeah.
Bond very quickly dispatches all of these bodyguards, leaving it with just him and Silva, with Silva at gunpoint. And Silva's like, what are you going to do? You're just trapped out here all by yourself. And he's like, am I? And then, ba-da, ba-da, ba-da-da, and a bunch of helicopters arrive. And it's like, you guys couldn't have been like 3 seconds sooner? Also, wouldn't we have heard the helicopters? We've had this problem before.
We've had this solution before.
Why are helicopters only silent until we can observe them?
In this case, they have the advantage of them potentially being like behind the buildings.
Yeah.
And they're big concrete buildings. So maybe I'm reaching.
Big ups to Q. Bond holds up his little radio transmitter and is like, it's the latest thing. It's called a radio. And yeah, excessive Bond theme use here.
Yeah.
And there we go. That's the end of the movie.
If this podcast were the movie, we have now in recording time exceeded its runtime.
Yeah. Just to give you an idea of how much I cut out of these. It's no content. It's just repeated words.
Yep.
So back at MI6, they go and meet Silva. M and Tanner and Bond talk to Silva, who's now in this like ridiculous Hannibal Lecter style isolation booth. And Silva's like, "Oh, hello, look at you. I've been thinking about you every day." And M's like, "Whereas I haven't thought about you at all." And so we hear the backstory now. He's telling this story, largely for Bond's benefit, more so than himself. But he was an agent in Hong Kong. He was captured, and they tortured him for information. They tortured him a lot, and he never gave up any information because he knew that MI6 would come and rescue him. But as time went on, he realized that they weren't going to rescue him. So he decided to use his cyanide tablet, which was in his tooth. So he got the cyanide tablet out of the tooth, bit down on it. He says, "It burned my insides, but I did not die," which sounds awful.
Yeah.
And then eventually he escaped and set up his own empire using the power of hacking, and holds M personally responsible for everything that happened to him because she abandoned him there and wants to take revenge. But he's been captured and he's stuck here, so obviously that's not going to happen.
Yeah, so much for that plan.
He also shows off what happens, he says, when you eat cyanide, but it doesn't kill you, which is, it's an amazing bit of sort of like combination makeup and CG, more so CG, but just really neat little horrifying thing that they do, where he grabs his teeth and sort of like clicks them to the side and then pulls out his entire, because he's had like teeth that Javier Bardem does not usually have. He's got this unusual sort of face shape and what look like fake teeth. And the teeth are connected to this sort of like silvered facial implant thing that fits like up sort of into his cheek. And without that, his cheek drops and gets incredibly like gaunt and thin, and it pulls his face down on one side and makes his eyeball look all sort of buggy, and he's got awful teeth that are still in there for some reason. I don't know why the horrible teeth are still in there, but anyway. And so he shows off this like deformity as a result of the cyanide burning the inside of his mouth. He's been using this sort of, I know that like fillings used to be silver, but like this implant being sort of silvered, it's like, it puts me in mind of Jaws.
Oh, yeah. I can see it.
The way that it is, and it's teeth thing. His teeth are not silver, but so yeah, it's it's hard to look at, right? So he's like, "Look at me, mother," is I think what he says, as she makes a quick exit to the room. And then after she leaves, he's like, to himself, sort of acts. He has this face of like, I think I put on a good show there. All right, cool, and puts the implant back inside and is like, neat, and then just starts laughing. They all leave him alone, and M confirms that, yeah, she did basically abandon him. It was 1997. The Hong Kong handoff was coming up. He was starting to operate outside his brief and doing hacksmanship on his own time for his own targets. And the Hong Kong secret intelligence were starting to get onto him. And so in exchange for 6 other agents, she gave him up. And she doesn't have any particular remorse about that. The way she tells it, it makes sense.
Yeah.
So you can't go around hacking them. Come on. Speaking of hacking, she's like, find out what he knows and how he hacked into our system and whatever's going on. So Bond goes and hangs out with Q. And, we get a little bit of techno babble. He's like, the encryption that he's got on here, only 6 people in the world would be able to bypass these safeguards. And Bond says, is that a problem? And Q's like, no, because I wrote them.
And then he plugs this laptop directly into the MI6 network.
Yeah. So we've got 3 scenes that we're cutting back and forth between here now. Shots of Silva in his little prison room, which just tells you that something's going to happen. Bond and Q doing their hacking, and M testifying before a government panel about the loss of this list and the MI6 agents dying. The government panel being led by Member of Parliament Claire Dower, played by Helen McCrory, who will probably be best recognized as Narcissa Malfoy from the Harry Potter movies.
Oh, all right.
I knew I'd seen her somewhere. I was like,
yeah. And she, over the course of this hearing, basically just dresses down M to the point that even Mallory gets tired of it.
Yeah, his line is, in the interest of variety, could we hear from the witness?
Yeah.
We have found out at this point that Mallory is actually former SAS.
Right. He's not just a government bureaucrat.
Yeah, he has actually seen time in the field. So Q is trying to hack Silva's computer. There's a massive screen that's showing stuff, and Bond notices a couple letters that he thinks look familiar and is like, wait, freeze, stop that, zoom in on that. Enhance. And it's the word Granborough, and he's like, that's an old tube station on the whatever line. Use that as a
I think he just says use it as the key.
The key phrase, right. So he's like, if we assume that this is Granborough, then what does that mean? And then this sort of web of whatever that they're looking at unravels itself, and it's a map of underground London. So not just all the tube tracks, but any sort of underground subterranean London, which is where they are. And then all the hatches in the floor of Q's office open up. And he's like, why has that happened? And Bond goes, oh crap, and tears off back towards Silva as Q realizes what has happened and starts ripping the cables out of the laptop. Because he's like, wait, how did he get into our system? And then Silva's computer is like, not such a clever boy. You know, it's a little, it doesn't actually say that. It's the words are there. If it said it, it'd be maybe a little too Dennis Nedry from Jurassic Park.
You didn't say the magic words.
Bond gets back to Silva's cell. The two people that were in there are dead somehow. Yeah. And there's a hatch in the floor that's open, and Bond is now in pursuit of Silva underground. So there's a little bit of a section where he's chasing Silva, and Q is looking at the map and being like, he must be this way. And Bond almost gets run over by a tube, by a subway.
Is the train itself called the tube, or is it the tube is called the tube and the train is called the train?
That's a great question, and I actually don't know. As soon as it came out of my mouth, I was like, that sounds wrong. You take the tube. You travel by tube when you're talking about, I know that to our UK listeners, this will sound wrong with my accent, but I know that you travel by tube. You take the tube. Is the physical vehicle the tube?
Yeah. Or is it the train that takes you through the tube? Which is definitely what it is, right? Like the train is running through a literal tube. Anyhow, this is a ridiculous digression. I just keep throwing grenades on our attempt to record this podcast tonight.
Anyway.
Does tube refer
I tried to look it up too.
The train or the tube? The nickname tube comes from the round tunnels some trains use. All right, I'm calling the train a train. It's a tube and a tube train. It's decided here. If you're from the UK and want to correct me, you're wrong. I have come up with the correct answer.
The trains go through the tubes.
Yes.
Terrific.
Very good.
At a tube station, Silva is handed a package by two men disguised as police, and then we see that what it is his own police uniform that he has changed into. Q is watching the cameras because he's, hacked into all the cameras at the tube station and is trying to determine if he can see Silva somewhere. Bond is like, do I get on the train or off the train? Do I get on the train? Because it's full of people, right? This station is full of people. It's rush hour, and Bond doesn't know if Silva's on the train or not. So he's like, do I get on the train or off the train? Like, what do I do? And the doors close with Bond on the platform, and the train starts to pull away as Q says, yes, get on the train. And Bond has this great, like, oh God, facial expression as he runs after the train and leaps on the back of it, holding on for dear life as it leaves the station, causing a bystander watching to comment, well, he's in a hurry to get home.
I love the incredibly perplexed train operator just sitting in the driver's compartment as Bond is like, open the door, please. And she just sits there. It's like, open the bloody door.
And she does, still looking shocked. And he's just like, health and safety, normal inspection, carry on. So he follows along. At the hearing, M is now receiving word that Silva has escaped. And Tanner says, we have to get you out of here. M refuses to leave because it's in the middle of a hearing where she's already being dressed down. She's like, well, I'm not showing my back here. The train gets to another station. Silva takes off. Bond is in hot pursuit. They do the thing I've always wanted to do. They slide down the bit between the escalators.
I'm given to understand that it would go much less well for you.
Well, in real life, they have like stopper things on that to stop specifically this happening. Though maybe those only got installed after Skyfall popularized sliding down the thing between escalators. Who knows? There are cops everywhere, but Bond sees that there's a door ajar and manages to keep following Silva back into some various underground tunnels. There's this huge underground, like vaulted ceiling place, and Silva is climbing up a ladder. Bond shoots at him. It hits the ladder, and Silva stops. And Bond's like, okay, you need to stop because I've got you here at gunpoint. And then Silva's like, hey, you were talking about this to me earlier. Check this out. It's a radio, and presses a button, and then this wall explodes behind Bond. It's very impressive that Silva had all this planned out. This particular...
It strains believability.
Yeah.
Quite a lot.
Not as much as the next bit, where Bond quips, if that explosion was for me, then I think you missed. And Silva says, no, that wasn't for you. But this is. And then a train, because we're calling them trains now, comes firing through the wall. This hole that was created in the wall, and Bond has to dive out of the way. It looks amazing.
It looks amazing.
But yeah, it's like, why was it going at that angle to be able to come in the wall at like 45 degrees? And why didn't Bond still just like shoot him? And it's very, very strange that this train comes through. This was a set, by the way. This was not a miniature.
Oh, yeah.
This was a full-sized set that they built with a full-sized train that they fired through the wall.
Yeah. You know what the least believable part of this entire scene is for me?
That the train was predictably on time?
No, that the train was empty. We've just established that it's rush hour.
That's a good point, actually.
Fill it with dummies or something.
Yeah, the train actually survives pretty well.
Yeah. Don't give me credit for that point. That was just me being silly. It's very cool. I think the train is awesome. It makes less than no sense, but it's awesome.
Silva gets picked up by another police car because he has a bunch of folks that are all disguised as cops. They hand him a gun. They head off to this hearing where M is because they know where M is.
So why did he drop the train on Bond? My assumption here, so one of the things that's kind of wild about this plan is that there are so many things that have to happen in order for this plan to come together, right? Like he needs
so many moving parts.
He needs to have predicted every action of every person involved across the course of all the events of the movie, including James Bond. Like Bond is falling into his trap all the way along here. He's not actually like causing Silva any problems. The train being dropped on Bond, that was not orchestrated for the purpose of dropping a train on Bond, right? Like that's not why he did that. I don't think it's ever actually made really explicit in the movie, but my thinking here is that it's actually to draw as many police and emergency services away from this hearing as possible and to create enough chaos and emergency responders that he can sort of move freely through this area while disguised in order to get to the hearing.
That makes sense.
I guess. But then how long ago was the hearing scheduled? Right? Like, so now I'm like trying to follow this thread through. It's like, how long ago was this hearing scheduled? Was this hearing months in planning? Because this operation had to have been months in planning. It's not like Silva just installed the bombs while he was waiting for Bond to catch up with him. He knows that everybody's dressed as police. Like, they had to know that there was going to be a big police presence here. So, like, how quickly were they able to spin up this operation? Because I assume this hearing was scheduled, like, maybe days or weeks ago. This didn't all spring up in the last 48 hours, this plan. I've pulled the entire movie apart at this point. I am generally pretty forgiving of movies that are like, everything has to go completely right in order for X to happen.
I do love all the Ocean's movies.
I love the Ocean's movies, and even in movies where it's like it pushes the envelope of believability, I'm still usually pretty forgiving of it. And I'm talking it through for the sake of creating content for this podcast, not because I don't think this is a cool movie that I like a lot. But if you actually sit and think about the mechanics of Silva's plan here, they don't really... He was relying on Q having bad OPSEC and plugging in his laptop into the network unprotected and unisolated.
I mean, I guess the theory is that he already knows everything that happens on the internal systems anyway. He just can't control them. So I guess he was relying on Q having bad OPSEC because he was able to determine that Q would have bad OPSEC, I guess.
Yeah, the number of failure points of this particular plan are very high.
Silva is very good at computers. That's what we are to understand.
All right, very good. Anyhow, I think he's just creating chaos and pulling emergency responders away from the hearing. That was really all I meant to get to.
All right.
Anyhow, Emma's giving a very impassioned speech about being afraid of the things that hide in the shadows during all this.
Up to and including quoting Tennyson, which is a very good excuse to get Judi Dench to recite some Tennyson, but is maybe a little extravagant for a government hearing.
Yeah.
Tanner, meanwhile, is getting repeated emails that say, sender, Q branch, subject, urgent, message, get M to safety. It's like, you just imagine Q back at the base being like, wonder if I should phone him. No. He's probably seen the email. But has he? Yeah, I'll send another email. We'll do that. I just imagine, it's not just the hair. I just imagine this guy's like Maurice Moss from the IT crowd, right? Dear
I'll
Fire
put 2
Department.
stars around urgent this time, and maybe that'll That'll drive the point home.
Just put this over here with the rest of the fire.
Yeah. We also learn over the course of M's speech, this is just a little character thing, that her husband passed away. So the poor truck driver from the last movie.
Yeah.
He's no longer in this franchise.
Yeah.
His character is passed on between movies.
She does make a good speech using Mallory's words, sort of not against him, but against the notion of this inquiry by talking about what happens in the shadows. And it's like, do you feel safe? You don't know what happens in the shadows. I do. That's why I do this. You think that everything's fine because you don't see the things that I've stopped, which is it's fair. We've got an extensive film catalog of things that MI6 has managed to prevent happening.
Yeah.
A lot of which was publicly known. Anyway, Silva just walks right into this building and him and his cop disguised friends shoot a bunch of the guards, and he does eventually burst into the room and they start shooting a whole bunch of people. He sights up on M and takes like a half a second to savor the moment, which is just enough time for Mallory to grab M and take the bullet in his arm. And Mallory, again, former SAS, grabs a gun from a fallen police officer and ends up returning fire. So Bond and Eve, who is also there, and Mallory are all returning fire against these men. All the actual police in the room, dead. They just get taken down easily. Bond blows up 2 fire extinguishers, which fill the room with smoke. I don't think this actually how fire extinguishers work, but I'm not going to worry about it, which creates a smoke screen allowing them to get M out of there. Bond chases Silva outside, sees that Silva's gotten away, but notices M's car. So when Tanner sneaks M outside and gets M into the car just leaves, and Tanner's like, what? Because Bond is driving the car.
Yeah.
And M is like, is this kidnapping? And Bond's like, I think technically yes. Bond realizes that Silva wants M, so he has to get M out of there. Neither of them want to put anybody else in danger. M is like, yes, I'm completely on board with this. Get me the heck out of here, as far away from here as possible. You know, nobody else, just you and me. And Bond's like, great, that's also what I was planning on doing.
Yeah.
And then he calls into Q and is like, can you leave a trail of breadcrumbs to where we are going to be that is so obfuscated that only someone as good as Silva would be able to find it? Meaning he wants Silva to find them, but he wants it to look like they're trying to hide so that it's only Silva who could find them.
Right.
But of course, their car has a tracking device, so he takes M to a garage where he unveils the car that they are going to be switching to, which is a very old Aston Martin. Specifically, the Aston Martin from Goldfinger. Yes, I checked. It's the same license plate number.
Good. I'm glad they got that detail right.
And it does plays the Bond theme a little bit. She's like, what, you expect me to ride in that thing? And he's like, get in.
She's like, oh yes, this is completely inconspicuous.
Yeah. As they're driving around, she comments that it's not actually particularly comfortable. And he flips up the button on the stick shift for the ejector seat. And she says, oh, go on, eject me then. And he flips it back down and they exchange a smile. But what that says is that it's not just that this is an Aston Martin that Bond has that he likes. This is the same car.
At the very least, it acknowledges that at one point in MI6's history, they made an ejector seat Aston Martin that Daniel Craig's Bond has come into possession of because I guess he likes to collect artifacts of MI6's history. No, it's the same car.
This is what happens when you make a 50th anniversary special.
Yeah.
Back at MI6, no one is in Q division except for Q and Tanner. I like that Tanner is drinking a beer. I just really like that detail. He's got like a Heineken?
Yeah.
I don't know. I like that he's like, okay, everyone else has gone home. It's after hours, just me and Q, and we're trying to save M's life. I'm cracking a beer.
Casual Fridays.
Yeah. So Mallory comes in with his arm in a sling and bandaged up. And he's like, hey, what are you doing? And Tanner and Q are like, because they're not supposed to be doing this, right? This is totally off book. And he immediately is like, oh, are you disguising what they're doing so that only Silva will be able to track them down? And they're like, yes. He's like, great, awesome, good job, keep at it. And I think Tanner is like, but what if the Prime Minister finds out? And he says, well, then I guess we'll all be out of a job. And Tanner and Q exchange this look with this look on Tanner's face of sort of like, hey, maybe this guy's all right.
Yeah.
And I really like that. I, too, have come around on Mallory over the course of the movie. As you are expected to do.
Yes. So then we cut to the Scottish Highlands.
Oh my God, it's gorgeous.
And this will be the venue of the remainder of the film.
Boy, will it.
Yeah, welcome to the third act.
This is also a long movie. It's like 2.5 hours, this movie.
It is, yeah. 2 hours and 23 minutes. It's one short of Casino Royale.
All these shots of Bond and M standing looking over the Highlands are gorgeous. Sorry, it's really pretty. It's all fog and anyway, looks cool. It's established that this is where Bond grew up.
Yeah.
Because even though Daniel Craig doesn't sound particularly Scottish, it was established by Fleming in the novels that Bond is of Scottish descent. He wasn't originally, but then Fleming came around. We'd mentioned this once before, but Fleming came around on Connery so much because initially he was like, I don't think this guy's right for it, but then liked Connery so much that he retroactively made Bond Scottish in the books, which is funny because, of course, then he would go on to be played by a Brit and an Aussie and an Irish. Now another Brit, but it's just kind of funny.
They arrive at an old hunting estate, the nameplate on which is Skyfall.
Skyfall.
With a statue of a buck at the entrance.
Yeah.
As we pull up, we learn that this is where Bond grew up. Well, this is where Bond was a child.
We don't get an exact timeline for like how old he was when his parents were killed in a climbing accident, I think is what we've been told, at least by Alec Trevelyan in GoldenEye. Mm-hmm. But Bond was certainly old enough to remember the house and remember the groundskeeper.
Yes.
So he can't have been that young.
No, I gather he was probably somewhere between like 9 and 14.
That's maybe a little older than I was going, but yeah.
I sort of picked that just from the line from the groundskeeper later on with the priest hole. When your parents died, you went in there for 3 straight days, and when you came out, you were no longer a boy. The sort of like that age range where you're young enough for going and hiding in that hole is the like appropriate reaction to a trauma of that sort, but old enough to be like graduating from boyhood based on your processing of that trauma. Mm-hmm. I would say like late single digits, early double digits, and not much older than that. We'll get more of his family history in the next film, but
right,
he was a child in this one.
The house itself looks well cared for, but the rooms are sort of like wrapped up and there's a lot of furniture and things missing. We will learn that it's because he was the only heir to this house and then he died, so they started selling stuff. Like lawyers started liquidating the estate.
Yeah. In fact, we learned that they've sold the house. He no longer owns the house.
And he's told this by Kincaid, who steps out of the shadows with a shotgun and somehow recognizes Bond. Bond responds, "Good God, you're still alive." So Kincaid, the groundskeeper, is played by Albert Finney, who has been in roles all the way back to the 60s. He played Tom Jones in Tom Jones. He played Scrooge in the 1970 Ebenezer Scrooge. He played Poirot in the original Murder on the Orient Express. So it's just kind of great that a British actor with some amount of gravitas.
Right.
He was also in the Bourne movies as Dr. Hirsch.
Oh, of course. Right. Yeah. I was thinking he's got an incredibly recognizable voice.
Mm-hmm. There was a story at the time that, like most fun stories, got sort of blown a little bit out of proportion. But according to Sam Mendes, there were never any talks about this. But they did briefly consider, wouldn't it be fun if the groundskeeper was played by Sean Connery?
Ah, that was what I was going to ask.
Yeah.
I had been given to understand that this role was offered to Sean Connery, but interesting. They sort of like had a laugh about it, but then decided not to do it, I guess, rather than proceeding far enough to ask.
Yeah. According to Mendes, he's like, it would have taken you out of it too much for it to be like, wait, isn't that Sean Connery or whatever? You know, more than other stuff that are already kind of taking you out of it, I guess. But, you know, I'm very much of two minds of it. One of like, oh, that would have been sweet. And also, no, this was absolutely the correct choice to not have him do it.
Can you imagine how many YouTube videos there would have been in 2012 and 2013 being like, the ending of Skyfall explained, what does it mean? With a picture of Sean Connery's head photoshopped over some big bold text.
Oh, God. I hope.
I'm sorry for putting that evil into the world.
I hope that what we are doing with this podcast is at least in some way a small balm in the face of what YouTube movie criticism, in big air quotes, has become.
They didn't cast Sean Connery. Ding.
Oh. Lord almighty. Hey, everyone go check out Film Joy. Our friend Mikey Newman does a really great positive channel about film, and it's awesome. And you should go watch his stuff.
Yeah.
Oh,
Watch Mikey. Watch Lindsay Ellis.
oh yeah.
Watch Patrick Willems. I'm going to just plug all three. They're constantly in my rotation, and they should be in your rotation too.
I only recently discovered Patrick Willems during his quarantine content of I subscribed to the American Movie Network crate of suggested wine pairings.
Yeah.
And it was like, yeah, I want to watch a man get drunk on ridiculous wine and talk about the movies that are supposedly supposed to be paired with them.
Yeah. He's got an incredible back catalog, and one that's relevant to this, actually. He just did a piece on the Austin Powers movies, which a lot of people have been asking us to cover Austin Powers movies. Go watch that. It's a really good video.
Oh, there you go. Bond gives Kincaid the rundown, which is basically some people are going to come here and try to kill her, and we're going to kill them first. And he's like, all right, I'm in. I love Kincaid. I'm so glad they didn't kill Kincaid.
Yeah. All of the little affectations of Kincaid are great, too, because he's like, this is M, and he proceeds for the remainder of the film to call her Emma.
Yeah. And I don't know if that's because he misheard or whatever, but I just love he's like, all right then, Emma, come on. Yeah.
He's like, do we have any guns? Like, well, no, they sold the whole collection because they thought you were dead. But we still have your father's old hunting rifle because we couldn't bear to give that up. So come out back and I'll show you how to shoot it. Bond proceeds to like 1-2 shot his targets. And Kincaid is just like, what did you say you did again?
What did you do for work again? And then I also love, again, more foreshadowing. He's like, well, we've got these two guns. We've got the guns you have. We've got TNT from the quarry. And then, of course, sometimes the old ways are best, as he puts down this like hunting knife. So they don't have a lot.
Yeah.
And so now begins the section of the movie that I've heard derisively referred to as Bond Alone. As in a sort of Home Alone reference.
Yeah.
I don't think that's an unfounded comparison, but I don't think it's bad.
No, it's good. It's different.
I quite enjoyed this.
Yeah. It's actually interesting because you correctly noted that the end of this movie is a lot smaller and a lot more personal, but it's also sort of like Bond versus the villain and all of his henchmen. It's still that like Bond infiltrating the enemy base and killing all his henchmen and then killing the bad guy scene. It's just that the bad guy has come to Bond instead of the other way around. Like the actual like what happens in the scene is not that different from, I don't know, the end of, say, Tomorrow Never Dies, right? Bond and his one buddy go up against the bad guy and his entire team, and it's a big shootout, and they're using every advantage that they can get to do it, and at the end, everything is on fire, and the bad guys are dead.
Yeah.
It just happens to be that it's happening in this old mansion as opposed to the villain's lair, or stealth ship, as the case may be.
Yeah, that's true. The Home Alone comparison comes in because they lay a bunch of traps. They set up a mirror. Bond puts shotgun shells into the floor. M makes nail gun bombs using like light bulb filaments and gunpowder and screws in baggies wrapped into the light fixtures. They board up the windows. They prepare for a siege, essentially. There's a bit where Kincaid makes his gun sawed off, blows a hole through a door. It's pretty funny. So then a whole bunch of dudes finally show up just as it's getting to be nightfall. They put a C4 charge on the door, which seems excessive, but whatever. And we see that Bond is in fact outside the building, hiding in the driver's seat of the Aston Martin, and he activates the guns, the machine guns from the front of the Aston Martin. So he manages to blow up a bunch of them. The rest of them retreat into the house where the various traps do their job. All seems to be going fairly well. I mean, we find out M is a terrible shot, and she's very embarrassed by that. But otherwise, everything seems to be going okay. M does get tagged slightly. She gets hit, but seems to be okay. In fact, Bond doesn't even realize she's been hit. Then things take a real step up. Sam Mendes talks about how they went back and forth on this part a lot.
Yeah.
Because he wanted to keep things a little more buttoned down, and the producers were like, no, we need a helicopter. We gotta amp up the ending of this movie. And Sam Mendes was like, all right, we can make this work because Silva is very over the top. So we'll have him play his own entrance music, which he played earlier as well in The Abandoned City. So they hear this music, boom, boom, by the animals blaring as this helicopter arrives. And Bond is like, what the heck is happening here? And the helicopter's enormous gun starts just destroying the house. So Bond tells Kincaid and M to take, it's called a priest hole.
Yes, and it's a little escape tunnel
Yeah.
from the house. I looked it up because I was curious. It dates back to the persecution of Catholics.
Mm-hmm. As Kincaid introduced it earlier, it goes from beside the fireplace to out on the moors, and there's a chapel nearby. So he's like, take the tunnel, get to the chapel. So they run away. Silva and a bunch more dudes get out of the helicopter. The helicopter gets back in the air, and Silva just starts walking around the house, throwing fire grenades into the house. And then indicates that the helicopter should take out the Aston Martin, which it does, and it explodes, and that's very sad. And then it zooms in on Bond's face as the Bond theme hits, and it's like, oh no, now you've really pissed him off. And the car exploding and Bond's facial reaction, fine. Both of those and the theme song, I was like, that's a little much. James Bond revenge powers activate. Like he wasn't already upset. Bond manages to find some like propane tanks, ties the TNT to them, lights a fuse, runs into the tunnel himself. They blow up, just destroying the house. Shrapnel from the house flies up and hits the helicopter and knocks out the pilot. And then the helicopter crashes into the house itself. And then there's a huge explosion. And I gave them crap for this in The World Is Not Enough. And I'm going to do the same now. Bond just stone cold outruns a fireball.
Yeah. He does indeed.
In the tunnel.
Yeah.
Blows him off his feet and like knocks him silly for a moment or two, but still.
Yeah. He manages to find a little alcove to like dodge into.
Yeah.
Because as we know, fire can't turn corners.
Famously. Well, it can't turn left.
Oh.
So the rest of the scene on the surface anyway from here out is just, oh, it's gorgeous. It's all just silhouettes and smoke and flame, and it looks so cool.
Yeah, it does.
It looks so cool. I was astonished to find out which parts of this were on a sound stage.
Yeah.
The house exteriors they built
right
on a location in England, not in Scotland, but they built it, and then so they could blow it up and set it on fire and everything. But stuff like the lake, there's a frozen over lake. That's a set.
Oh, wow.
And the stuff here that was a set that they were able to just blend in with the location shooting it's astonishing. So looks amazing. Silva spots Kincaid's flashlight way out on the moors and realizes where they are. So I think at this point we're down to Silva and two goons who didn't get killed by the explosion. Bond chases one down and takes him out and gets stopped as he's running across a frozen lake by Silva, and the other goon comes up beside Bond. Bond grabs the other goon's automatic rifle, spins around as the guy is just sort of reflexively firing it, and like spins the guy around him so that it blows like a hole in the ice that they both fall through into the frozen water. So Silva's like, okay, I guess that problem took care of itself, and keeps on heading to where M is. Silva just has a great facial expression because he still has his gun pointed at Bond. He's just like, okay, yeah, all right, okay, sure.
Yeah. That was easy.
So there's a cool underwater fight, which of course was shot in the Pinewood tank of Bond and this guy. It's neat watching the behind the scenes features because like they have these special underwater speakers, and this woman clearly whose job is to have a voice that's good for using these speakers. Because there's shots with cameras underwater where you can hear just clear as day. She's like, Sam would like you to try that one again, please. Thank you. And everyone underwater with like their scuba tanks and stuff is doing like thumbs up and like, yeah, all right, okay, cool. You know, we'll do that again. But it comes through crystal clear. It's amazing.
Neat.
They have the largest underwater tank of that kind at Pinewood.
Oh.
So yeah, Bond fights the guy and fires off a flare. I think he's using the flare to...
Bond fights the guy, kills him, then drops him to the bottom, then looks up and realizes that he can't see where the hole was in the ice.
Oh, okay.
That they dropped through. So he swims back down to the guy's corpse, pulls a flare off him, and then fires it at the ice, which then illuminates the whole ice sheet. And he can see where the ice is all broken because of the uneven way that it's lit. And so it just shows him where the hole is.
Right. It looks really cool.
Yeah.
As Silva finally gets to the chapel, he pauses briefly to observe the gravestone in memory of Andrew Bond and Monique Delacroix Bond, tragically departed. So his name is Bond, James Bond. That wasn't meant to be a joke. His name is James Bond. It's not
even a cover name. Yeah.
No, it's not even a cover name. That's the baffling part. His name is, maybe his first name isn't James. Kincaid certainly thinks it is, but it's Bond. So this just tears asunder all those things because it's like, no, his name is actually James Bond. Also, he's been around since the 60s. Just try try to not worry. Try to not concern yourself with continuity in these movies, please. At least across the franchise. Obviously, across the Craig stuff, there's like direct continuity. But Silva thinks this is very amusing, much like most things. He just thinks things are neat.
I like the delight he takes in such simple things.
Yeah. So he walks into the chapel. I love this. Kincaid comes out of the back room and he's like, well, I can't find any. And Silva just shoots the stone beside him. And Kincaid is like, I'll be shutting up now. Like, he doesn't say that, but he's just like, all right, you're the one with the gun. Silva loves this. He's like, of course, a chapel. Of course it had to happen here. Oh, thank you. This is brilliant. You know, he's really excited about this, about it being in a chapel. He notices that M is hurt. He's like, oh, look what they did to you. How could this happen? I'm so sorry. Even though it's like, it was your guys, you fool.
Yeah.
And then he's like, wait a minute. I've got it. It's perfect. Here, you take the gun. You hold it. You've got to kill us both. One bullet. You can deal with both of us. It'll be great. M can't really do anything because, again, she's weak. He's overpowering her and the gun is to her head first. So she can't like be like, haha, got you. And just before he's going to force her to pull the trigger, he recoils screaming in pain as it is revealed that Bond hurled that hunting knife, sometimes the old ways are the best, across the chapel and got him right in the back.
I wonder if this movie has a thesis statement.
I don't mind when I don't mind when a movie's themes are explicitly written into the dialogue as long as it's done in a clever way.
Yeah, it's fine. It's perfectly fine. It's just very out there, like apparent.
Silva, for his part, collapses dead after turning around and yelling at Bond a little bit. But Silva has indeed been defeated, meaning the job is done, meaning that M can now leave.
This plane of existence?
Well, she said to Mallory earlier, she's like, forget dignity, I'll leave when the job is done. And now the job is done, so now she can leave as she collapses into Bond's arms. Their final exchange is M says, too late to make a run for it. Bond says, I'm game if you are. And then she sort of focuses her attention and looks at Bond and says, well, I did get one thing right before she passes away. And Kincaid takes his hat off, which I like.
I like that Kincaid takes his hat off. Bond is visibly distraught by this.
Yeah, because it is, like it or not, it is basically his mom.
Yeah. And so he gives her a kiss on the forehead, and the camera pulls back from Bond's back as Bond is cradling her in his arms.
And then we cut back to London.
Yeah.
As Bond stands legs astride on top of some building, we assume it's MI6, because he's approached by Eve, who says, I didn't even know that you could get up here. And he's like, it'd be a waste of a good view. She has a little box with her and says that they read M's will today, and she left him this, and it's the ceramic Winston Churchill bulldog.
And she comments that perhaps it was M's way of telling him to take a desk job. And he responds, no, just the opposite.
I don't know how that is meant to be interpreted that way, but okay.
He hated it. He hated the bulldog. He wouldn't want it on his desk.
Right. Right, of course. For her part, she has decided that she will take a desk job. After that thing at the hearing, she does not like being in the field. Mm-hmm. And she'll be working as an assistant directly to Mallory. So they go back inside, and he's like, by the way, I don't think we've ever actually been formally introduced. And she says, yes, my name is Eve Moneypenny. And her office, which is separated from Mallory's office by a wooden door with big, puffy, red leather, just like in the olden times. It looks like Bernard Lee's office.
It does.
And Mallory is there still with his arm in a sling. And he walks in and says, good, 007, we need you if you're ready to get back to work. And he says, with pleasure, M. With pleasure. And then we cut to the white circle dashing across the screen and opening up to James Bond in the gun barrel sequence, turning and shooting the camera. And that's the end of the movie.
Yeah. Now, real quick before we move on.
Yeah.
In M's new office, we are shown another painting of a ship on the back wall. And this is just something that shows up on trivia sites all the time. Like, I'm sure a lot of people will know, but it's just interesting. The painting that Q and Bond look at, we talked about it earlier. It's the ship being hauled into harbor. It is the Temeraire, right? The ship being hauled off for scrap is the Temeraire. The painting on M's office is of the HMS Victory.
In the Battle of Trafalgar.
Which the Tremere also participated in. And so the meaning, quote unquote, end of James Bond, Skyfall explained. The trivia here is that, like, those two ships were participants in the same battle. One got hauled off or scrapped, was old and beaten. One is at the height of its glory. It's a theme. It's a metaphor.
I like that. That's good.
Yeah. Bond is like rejuvenated. He's no longer an old, beaten down warrior, but a rejuvenated, strong ship ready to fight the good fight. A little bit of visual relationship there, which is neat. But now that the movie is over, now we have M and we have Moneypenny and we have Q. Now Bond can truly, finally, at long last, be Bond. All of the pieces necessary to make a normal standard Bond movie are in place. Surely we're not missing anything. Bond can finally be in a Bond movie.
I guess we'll have to see how that pans out next time.
Now at the end of his career.
Yeah, that is weird.
Right?
That is really weird, yeah.
It is wild to me that this movie tries to both be a prequel and the story of Bond, like, at the tail end of his tenure, going out for one last hurrah.
I saw somebody, I don't know if it was on the Discord or in the comments or something, suggesting that Casino Royale is you are too young for this ass, and this movie is being too old for this ass.
Yeah.
Which, of course, makes Quantum of Solace just the ass.
Yeah, that was on Twitter.
That was good.
It's a good joke, but it is wild. It's so weird. It makes this movie really interesting, but it also makes this movie really frustrating in a lot of ways.
It's weird. I really like the movie. Fundamentally, I like watching it. It's fun. It's exciting. It's an adventure and all that.
Yeah.
But all that stuff does really bug me.
Yeah. It's not even, I'm worried. I'm now trying to talk ahead of our comment section. It's like, it's not a continuity problem within the franchise as a whole, right? Like, if this movie were just like, this is the story of Bond coming out of retirement for one last hurrah, and all of the other movies happened between the prequel and this one, and their end caps, that all scans fine. It's literally that this movie is about Bond being old and slow after having just had his origin story done, and also continues to function as an origin story. The M office that we have that comes to be at the end of this movie is calling back to like M's office in the 60s and the 70s. And it's like, okay, but if we want to pretend that all of the adventures that happened in between, I mean, Judi Dench being M on both sides doesn't work, but like this can't function as an origin story for all of the trappings of, like, it's just weird. So it's like, continuity be damned. There's no point in worrying about it. It's truly, this movie lays waste to any claims of there being anything resembling a franchise-wide continuity. Take the parts you like, ignore the parts you don't. The adventures that you want to consider happening happen, and we have entered the Ouroboros of James Bond consuming itself to sustain itself.
What worries me is that we know from pre-release information that in No Time to Die, he literally has retired.
Yeah.
And there is a different 007.
Yeah.
So yeah, I don't know. I'm looking forward to watching it, I tell you what.
Me too. I'm like super into it. I'm looking forward to going back to Spectre next week. But it is fascinating to me the way, I almost want to say like how piecemeal the Daniel Craig Bonds feel, because they clearly wanted to do a like narrative miniseries with like a narrative arc in a miniseries with Daniel Craig where like each movie is continuous with the next. And the actual result of what came out of it is such a mess. They tried and they did not really succeed on that front. But we will have more to talk about in that regard next week.
In the meantime, what do we think about this movie?
It's good.
It is good. All that stuff honestly bugs me, but this is a fun movie ultimately.
Yeah.
Pre-title sequence. What are we thinking here?
Pretty high.
You get a car chase into a motorcycle chase into a train fight.
Into a Bond death.
Yeah, I like it a lot.
It's pretty good. The action is great. I don't know. It's not at the top of my list, I don't think. It's good. It's exciting. It's got a little bit of character. It's got some good character interactions between Bond and Eve. It hooks into the movie. Like, it's better than Quantum's.
Yes.
Oh, yeah, I put Quantum's way at the bottom.
We
Okay.
put Quantum third from the bottom of our list.
All right, fair enough.
I'm actually going quite high with this. I'm putting this one at my number 5 at the moment.
Okay.
I think this is, for me, this is actually better than the one for Live and Let Die.
Okay.
Which is currently my number 5. Because
Yeah.
it's got plot hooks, it's got character stuff, like character stuff even for Bond. We're learning more about his character, the stuff with Ronson. It's got cool action, fun action, Bond doing cool action stuff and also being suave about it. It looks amazing, and it ends with Bond dying. It's got everything. I love it.
Yeah, it's got it all. Yeah, I think it goes similarly just behind Casino Royale for me,
So 5th for you as well.
which puts it in like the same place.
I'm going to briefly change that, and this actually goes number 4 for me.
Ah, okay. Ahead of You Only Live Twice.
Yes, I think this is a better Bond death than You Only Live Twice. Because You Only Live Twice has a bunch of plot stuff and then Bond getting shot up in the Murphy bed, but there's no action in that.
Yeah.
And this is, I think, a better hook.
Yep, that's reasonable. I was actually going to ask you about that, but you beat me to it.
Title song, Skyfall by Adele.
Is good.
It is good.
I had to give this one some thought. It actually took me quite a while to come around to where I want to place this, but I think like I know where I want it to go. I know what echelon of Bond songs it lives with for me, and so I'm gonna do it. But it feels almost like I'm punishing this song. Because of how far down my list it is. So I think the song is really good, right? Like I think the song is a really good callback to classic Bond themes. I don't think it belongs in my top 5 because my top 5 are Goldfinger, Another Way to Die, Live and Let Die, View to a Kill, and Goldeneye. And it's like, do I like this better than any of those? And I don't think I do. 6, as I complained about last week, I guess, on Her Majesty's Secret Service, which also just rips. The area like where I want to place it is with the other classic Bond themes that don't really land in the same category as my top 5, right? And for me, those big ones, like the big guns, are Man with a Golden Gun and Diamonds Are Forever.
Right.
And I think it goes behind Diamonds. I think the song is a great homage to the old belters of years past. I mean, I think it's better than a lot of the old belters of years past, but I think it sitting right alongside Diamonds Are Forever is the right place for it, for me. Diamonds is this great classic Bond theme that is really evocative to me, and I think I like Skyfall better than I like Thunderball, so I'm happy to just sort of slot it in right there.
Yeah, that makes sense. I'm definitely in the same realm on my list. I mean, like the top half of this list are all great. I mean, you and I have never quite agreed on Thunderball. It's been close for us, but we've never been like in exactly the same sort of realm. So I actually like Thunderball, I think, a little more. So before you started talking, I was looking at putting this in the same position on the list. I just have different other stuff around there. So yeah, this actually also goes, what is this, 9th? Yeah, 9th.
Yeah, 9th.
Yeah.
All right, cool. See what I mean by saying that, like, that feels mean, though? Like, it's still top 10.
Because I love this one, and this was huge when it came out, and I really, really like this. I just like these other ones more. They're all great.
Yeah.
But if you, the listener at home, are reductive and just look at the list as a pure ranking, then...
From good to bad, yeah.
Yeah, then it looks...
a linear progression from the best to the worst.
Yeah, which is not what this is.
20 goods and 3 bads. And just various levels of good. All right, and finally, the film itself.
This film is complicated for all the reasons we've just spent hours describing.
Yeah.
I don't know. I mean, it's great. Ultimately, I really like it. And it's fun to watch, and it's exciting, and it does lots of fun stuff that I like.
And it's oh so pretty.
It's gorgeous. It's the only time a Bond film has been nominated for cinematography.
And it deserves the nomination.
I think I can comfortably put this 8th.
Okay.
Behind For Your Eyes Only.
Okay.
And that also feels wrong.
Right?
It's absolutely the second best Daniel Craig movie.
Yes.
Behind Casino Royale.
So far, Graham. There's still one more to go.
I've got big hopes, man.
Yeah, I'm sort of like, I'm struggling. I'm in the same ballpark as you. I don't think it belongs in my top 5. I was thinking I might put it ahead of Live and Let Die, which would put it 2 spots ahead of where you have it.
It's so recent, and I remember watching it in theaters and going wild for it, just being blown away.
Yeah.
And if you had asked me before we started this, what's going to be in your top 5, I probably would have been like, oh, Skyfall is going to be in the top 5. Rewatching it through the lens of recording this and being critical of these movies as both movies and Bond movies, I'm comfortable with 8th.
You know what? I'm going to do the same thing. I'm putting it in exactly the same spot, which is Behind For Your Eyes Only for me.
Yeah.
It's a darn good movie. I like it a lot. It frustrates me in some ways and excites me and thrills me in others. I would happily sit down and watch it basically whenever.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
Yeah, I'm happy with that. I think that's a good place for it. That's where it lives. It is written in stone. It is immutable. It cannot be changed. That is, everyone listening, please adjust your lists accordingly. Skyfall is canonically and forever the 8th best Bond movie.
Because we determine these things, you understand.
Yes.
Well, there we go. Boy, that was a long one.
Wait.
Sorry?
Wait.
What?
Favorite Bond moment. What was your most Bond moment? We're so bad at this.
I thought we just stopped doing it.
I know mine.
What's yours?
When he jumps into the train and adjusts his suit.
It's hard to argue with that one, honestly.
Yeah, I think the only moment that is a run for its money is him looking at the Komodo dragon and trying to point at it and then getting clobbered by the dude that he's fighting.
Oh, that's very good. This is not, strictly speaking, my Bond moment. I think my Bond moment is, I agree with you, adjusting his cuffs when he jumps onto the train. But I forgot to mention it at the time that at the beginning of the scene in the casino with Eve, when they both have their earpieces in, echoing the beginning of Casino Royale, he says to her, "Stop touching your ear." which I just was very amused by. It's like Bond constantly saddled with other field agents who don't know how to act like they don't have an earpiece in.
Yeah. All right, now we can move on.
All right. Next week, we will be looking at 2016's Spectre.
I have high... That doesn't work. That sounded better in my brain until I tried to pronounce it.
Expectorations?
That was where I was going, and then I couldn't get the word out.
You're gonna be spitting everywhere? You expectorate upon this.
Yeah.
I say this every week. I'm looking forward to watching it because, again, this one I haven't seen since theaters either. So, and I've been discovering new stuff about how I feel about these movies every time we do it. So
yeah. I'm in a similar boat. I have very strong opinions about Spectre because I have talked about this movie on the internet before, that I have built in assumptions about how I'm going to feel about it because I have already crafted an articulated argument for my opinions on Spectre. So it'll be interesting to see, going back to it since the last time I watched it, having articulated my thoughts on this movie in another form. It'll be interesting to see if my thoughts on this movie change, if what I have thought about this movie in the past holds true, or if I like it more, or if I like it less. I'm really interested to see how this measures up against my own prior estimation of this film.
Mm-hmm. I just know that I felt like it wasn't as good as Skyfall, so I'm just kind of going in I don't know what's going on. I barely remember it.
Yeah, one thing I reminded myself of earlier is that Spectre's a really long movie. Spoilers for you, by the way. It's the longest of the Craig Bond movies.
Oh, good.
And I remember what is, to my mind, the climactic action set piece of the movie. As far as I recall, it happens at the 1 hour and 30-minute mark. So I don't know how there's another hour of movie after that point. So either my recollection is wrong relating to where it falls in the film, or there's just a long period after that where stuff happens that isn't like the climactic battle. So I guess we'll see. I remember the major plot points of this movie. It'll be interesting to see how it all slots together, because despite remembering major plot points, I apparently don't remember how they're strung together at all.
Mm-hmm. Well, we'll find out next week, I guess.
Yeah.
In the meantime, I want to thank, of course, yourself, Matt, for joining me on these, as always.
Thank you for having me.
I want to thank Matt Griffiths for doing the video edit. Much appreciated for your great work there. Do give those a watch if you haven't had an opportunity to. Thanks to Featherweight for the art. Thanks to Heather for doing podcast admin. And of course, all of you, both just for listening and also for supporting us directly at patreon.com/ LoadingReadyRun. It supports not only this show, but everything that we do. Or if you'd rather stay within the YouTube realm, you could become a member on this very YouTube channel. But that will do it. Spectre next week, and the last episode of this for a little while anyway. So tune in for that. Until next time, this podcast will return.